The roar of the crowd still echoed in Ilaria Sand's ears long after the mountain smashed Prince Oberyn Martell's skull upon the tiles. The sun burned high above the fighting pit, and for a moment it seemed that time froze. Every breath in Ilaria's chest felt labored, as if the world refused to continue without the vibrant soul now lying in a crimson sprawl. Oberyn had been so full of life, grace, and righteous fury. Now he was gone, as lifeless as the blood-soaked sand beneath him. The memory of that dreadful instant, the moment of the brutal final blow, played again and again in her mind, a loop of impossible tragedy. Eyes wide, tears glistening, Ilaria had screamed, though she scarcely remembered the sound leaving her throat. His death was a vile theft in plain sight, the entire city as witness. Yet in that frozen sliver of time, a spark of rage flared in her heart. She glanced up at the dais where the Lannisters were gathered, Lord Tywin's expression carved from stone, Cersei's eyes locked on the carnage below, and Jaime's face grim. She caught a fleeting glimpse of Tyrion's horror and heartbreak as he stared at Oberyn's remains, but Ilaria wanted no pity from the imp or anyone else. Her lover was gone, and that was a wound too raw for pity to salve. In the hours that followed, the hush that fell over King's Landing felt too thin, as if the city itself quivered in the aftershock of Oberyn's brutal end. Rumors flew with the wind through Flea Bottom's crooked alleys and soared over the high walls into the sept courtyards, whispers and horror weaving through the throngs. At the Red Keep, the hush was broken by the clanking of guardsmen shifting their posts and the muffled sobs of some who had adored the charismatic Prince of Dorne. Ilaria never faltered as she made her way through the labyrinth of corridors. She had not the time nor the strength to collapse in tears. Instead, she imagined Dorne's golden deserts and the sizzling heat that nurtured its fierce, proud people. She knew exactly how the Martells would react. Vengeance was the backbone of their house motto, and Oberyn's death screamed for it, demanded it. The Lannisters had orchestrated this trial. Tywin's cunning had permitted this farce, and Cersei had gloated with her reptilian smile. Gregor Clegane might have delivered the fatal blow, but House Lannister was the serpent's true enemy. That night, Ilaria was given quarters in the keep, though she found no sleep. She kept replaying in her mind the negotiations that had led Oberyn to step forward as Tyrion's champion. She saw how the confidence in his eyes had shone like sunlit copper as he claimed victory in his mind even before the fight began. Oberyn had thirsted for vengeance for Elia, for Rhaenys, for Aegon. He had believed that trial by combat would deliver him Gregor's head in front of all, forcing the truth of the Lannister involvement in Elia's murder into the open. He had almost won. He had practically danced circles around the hulking beast, and yet that single misstep sealed his fate. She remembered the hush that fell when the mountain grabbed hold of him. She still heard the grotesque sound of bones cracking in her nightmares. Bitter tears lay on her cheeks, and yet beneath those tears grew a vow. If Oberyn had died for truth, then that truth would not go unsung. Dorne would not let his spirit rest untended, unavenged. When the raven arrived from Dorne, summoning Ilaria home, she read the missive with trembling fingers. Prince Doran Martell, Oberyn's elder brother, known for his measured caution, could not hide the heartbreak in his words, nor could he hide the rage. "Come home," the letter said. "Bring Oberyn's body so that he may rest under the sun of our homeland, that we may weep as one." There was no talk of forging alliances anew, no talk of subservience or acceptance of an apology from the crown. The letter might as well have been caked in dried tears and the silent fury of a wounded viper. Ilaria clutched it close, as if she could hear the prince's voice in her ear, grave and steady, urging calm even in heartbreak. Yet she knew that even the patient Doran would not let this slight go unanswered. "Blood demands blood," the people of Dorne would cry. After years of simmering resentment over Elia's murder, Oberyn's public, savage end in the capital was the final insult. The Lannisters had not just spilled Martell blood. They had paraded it like a spectacle for their games. On the dawn of her departure, as Oberyn's body was prepared for travel, Ilaria stood in the courtyard with her face turned toward the pale morning sun. Overhead, The sky bled from the darkness of the night into the first pastel streaks of pink and orange. Soldiers of the Red Keep eyed her nervously. The hush among the Dornishmen who had come with her mirrored the tension of drawn bowstrings. Each was a coil of anger, hardly able to contain the fury that lurked behind every glance at the Lannister guards. Her gaze settled one last time on the stone walls that encased the red towers. She thought about King's Landing's stench, the corruption woven into every rung of power. This city had devoured the man she loved, and it had done so at the Lannisters' bidding. Ellaria wanted to see it burn. She wanted the proud, cunning faces of Tywin and Cersei to melt into horror as the unstoppable wrath of Dorne came crashing upon them like a desert storm. Let them tremble, she thought. Let them realize what they have unleashed. 2 days later, she reached Sunspear. The difference between the pungent, busy capital of the Seven Kingdoms and the crisp dryness of the Dornish desert was staggering. The sea breeze brushed her cheeks, while the sun beat down relentlessly on the wide walls of the water gardens. People lined the roads to see the hearse that carried Oberyn's body, festooned with orange and gold banners bearing the proud son and spear of House Martell. No one was silent. There were shouts, cries for blood, for vengeance, for the downfall of the Lannisters. Though Doran Martell was not seen in public often, his gout pained him greatly. He had arrived in a fine, horse-drawn palanquin so he could meet Oberyn's remains personally. The entire city teemed with sorrow. Dornish men and women flung flowers at Ellaria's path and chanted Oberyn's name. Small children, tears in their eyes, looked on as if they had lost a father figure. Oberyn had always been beloved among the small folk here. Ellaria could almost hear him whisper that the adoration of the people was what made life sweet, and that without them, a prince was no one. She ascended the steps to where Prince Doran sat in his chair. His cheeks were sunken with grief, his hands trembling on the arms of the seat. All the stoic composure that once made him the calm center of Dorne's political storms had cracked, revealing a deeply grieving brother, father, and prince. Ellaria knelt at his feet, tears in her eyes. He lifted a hand and softly touched her hair. They were joined in sorrow, each without the man they loved so dearly. Together, they ordered the gates of Sunspear closed for a day of mourning. But within the halls of the castle, there was no rest. All eyes turned to Doran, for only he could decide the fate of the realm with a single word. The Sand Snakes, Oberyn's daughters, arrived in a swirl of tension and heartbreak. Obara, her jaw set, fists clenched, demanded war. Nymeria spoke with a cooler tongue but mirrored the same desire. The Lannisters must pay, and pay swiftly. Tyene, with her angelic features, flitted around Oberyn's body, murmuring soft prayers. She had a knack for disquieting calm, the sort that belied a deep, simmering fury. Sarella was absent, sailing somewhere upon the seas in pursuit of knowledge, but she would learn of her father's fate soon enough. Together, they confronted Prince Doran, words flying, voices raised. Doran's initial stance was to weigh all strategies, to consider alliances with the Tyrells, or to gather enough evidence that the mountain was indeed an instrument of the Lannisters' cruelty. But the snakes would not be satisfied with slow deliberation. The city had to pay, they argued. King's Landing had to see Oberyn's blood for the injustice it was. Ellaria was not a silent observer. In her heart, she knew war was looming, unstoppable, and she felt the same thirst for retribution. But she also understood the importance of cunning. She had been Oberyn's lover and companion. She had seen how measured cunning could be more lethal than raw force. She urged Doran and the Sand Snakes to consider the timing. The capital would be reeling with the news of Oberyn's death and the subsequent conclusion of Tyrion's trial. If they struck swiftly, King's Landing would be unprepared for an onslaught from the southern desert. The Lannisters might be scorpions in a nest, but scorpions could be crushed if one stomped without warning. She suggested that Dorne's armies assemble in secret, crossing the Red Mountains quickly while their enemy was in disarray. That night, Doran gave an address to a gathering of Dornish lords and ladies, as well as the captains of the armies of the major houses sworn to Sunspear. He spoke quietly, though his voice carried in the hush of the hall. He reminded them of the murder of Princess Elia Martell and her children, the decades of anger that had burned in Dorne's collective memory. He spoke of how, for years, he had tried to navigate the labyrinth of Westeros politics, forging alliances, attempting to gain reparations through words rather than bloodshed. But the realm had spat in Dorne's face, culminating now in Oberyn's public humiliation and slaughter. Finally, he whispered the words that the assembled men and women had yearned for. "We go to war." A cheer erupted. Sorrow turned to savage delight. War horns were sounded, drummers began a pounding refrain, and the name of Oberyn was on every lip. Ellaria stood there, the clangor reverberating in her chest, feeling Oberyn's spirit in the fervor. She silently vowed to do everything in her power to see House Lannister brought low. The lords and ladies dispersed to call their banners, to ready their knights, and to fill supply wagons with Dornish steel. Swords would be sharpened, spears polished. The famed Dornish bows, slim and deadly accurate, would be strung and tested. Envoys were sent in secret across the deserts to the Red Mountains, instructing the passes to be opened. Raven after raven was dispatched to other corners of the realm, forging alliances of convenience or simply ensuring that other houses turned a blind eye. Gold was counted in the vaults beneath Sunspear to fund the lethal enterprise. Doran, stern-faced, sat in the water gardens with Ellaria to plan each move carefully. War was not a single stab of a spear, but a dance, 1,000 thrusts and counters. The key was to reach King's Landing before the Lannisters could muster a response. If they seized the city, Tywin Lannister's power would crumble. This was the plan that took shape, forging in the fires of heartbreak and vengeance. Within a fortnight, the Dornish army assembled under the scorching sun outside Sunspear. Warriors with spears, cavalry with curved scimitars, archers with quivers bristling on their backs. The banners of House Martell snapped overhead, the golden spear piercing the red sun that shimmered in the heat. Oberyn's daughters moved among the ranks, Obara adjusting straps on her armor, Nymeria leaning in to speak with a cluster of captains, Tyene practicing the swirl of her daggers with lethal grace. Ellaria, though not a warrior by training, refused to hide in the background. She rode a sure-footed mare at the front, next to the palanquin that carried Prince Doran. Ario Hoda, the prince's towering captain of guards, stood watch like a sentinel, his long axe resting against his broad shoulder. The sight of so many bristling weapons, so much raw determination, made Ellaria's heart pound. She had never witnessed an army of this size mustering for full-scale war in her lifetime. This was not the casual threat or a border skirmish. This was the unstoppable force of Dorne, summoned to avenge its beloved prince. Word had spread quickly that Prince Doran was leading the campaign himself. Even if gout forced him to ride in that enclosed palanquin, it was still a powerful symbol that the ruling house of Martell would stand in the thick of the fray. Streets erupted in cheers whenever the host passed through a settlement. Women shouted blessings upon them. Men swore oaths to join at the next muster. Children waved small sun and spear flags. The host marched onward, winding through dusty roads and across the shimmering flats, forging an unbroken line of steel toward the Red Mountains. Ravens flew ahead, carrying the message of vengeance, and smaller forces under loyal Dornish lords broke off to secure the lesser passes, ensuring no one from the Crown's realm would have warning. In King's Landing, the atmosphere had changed since that bloody day. Word of Oberyn's death had traveled from the Red Keep to every tavern, every alley. The city was accustomed to death and chaos, but this had been different. Oberyn had been flamboyant, captivating, and the manner of his slaughter left citizens uneasy. Few outside the circle of courtiers knew precisely how or why, but the shock was enough to leave the capital on edge. Tywin Lannister, still the hand of the king, locked himself in council sessions, no doubt planning to quell any tumult that might arise from Dorne. The rest of the small council seethed with tension. Varys glided through halls with quiet watchfulness. Pycelle mumbled about the Seven, and Mace Tyrell attempted to remain affable, bridging alliances. Cersei Lannister smirked from behind her cup of wine, as if she found some amusement in Oberyn's demise, though privately, She must have realized the precariousness of the moment. Jaime, sporting his golden hand, was less comfortable. He had seen the mountain's cruelty, and he knew how vengeance festered. If Dorne truly rose up, King's Landing could face a crisis unmatched since the end of Robert's rebellion. Unseen by most was Tyrion Lannister, thrown into a cell once the trial ended in his defeat. His champion had died, meaning the verdict was clear. Tyrion was sentenced to death for King Joffrey's murder. Yet the city around him was far from calm. The tension in the castle's corridors was thick, and though Tyrion was no longer free to walk them, he had his methods of gleaning information. The guards, bored and talkative, gossiped about outraged Dornish lords, about the unstoppable forces rumored to be gathering in the south. Some said Oberyn's daughters were witches, conjuring vile magic to bring the mountain low. Others said the entire Martell family would march on the Red Keep, swords blazing, to avenge their fallen prince. Tyrion sat on the straw of his cell and stared at the flickering torchlight. He would have gambled that Doran Martell, known for patience, might not rush to war, but if the snakes or Illyria stoked the flames, or if the small folk demanded retribution, that patience might splinter. For once, Tyrion found a sliver of hope in the notion that the capital might soon be in chaos. Chaos was a ladder, or so Peter Baelish once said, and Tyrion needed every rung to climb out of this cell and avoid the headsman's axe. Cersei watched from her balcony as the royal guards performed their drills in the Red Keep's courtyard. She sipped her wine and let the sweet dryness wash over her tongue. The day was hot, the air stifling, but she refused to abandon her vantage point. In her mind, she relived Oberyn's final taunts and that savage end. She both loathed and admired the man's gall. Yet now, with his demise, she felt a sense of victory. Her father's plan had triumphed, Tyrion had lost his champion, and the Lannister name would maintain its hold on power, so she believed. But rumors from the south rattled her confidence. She had demanded updates from every raven that arrived, pressing the Master of Whisperers for any hint of Dorne's intentions. The news grew increasingly dire. Dornish banners raised, armies mustered. Cersei's mouth grew tight. War. She did not fear war in principle, for the Lannisters had faced rebellions before. But an entire region united in fury was another matter. And the Tyrell alliance, tenuous at best, might not hold if the cost of defending King's Landing grew too steep. She glanced sidelong at her father, who sat in a high-backed chair behind her. Tywin's expression was unreadable. She wondered if he felt that creeping unease gnawing at the pit of his stomach as well. Rumors gave way to fact when outriders from the Stormlands brought word that a Dornish force, massive in scale, had crossed the Red Mountains and was marching north. The bannermen under House Baratheon in Storm's End sent frantic pleas to the crown for assistance. If the Dornish turned east, they could sweep through the Stormlands, or if they stayed their course, they would reach the Rose Road and head straight for King's Landing. Tywin Lannister wasted no time. He summoned the remnants of the crown's forces, commanded that new levies be raised, and sent riders to petition the Tyrells in Highgarden. A hasty plan emerged. The crown's host would mass south of the Blackwater to intercept the Dornish. Meanwhile, the city's walls would be manned by every able-bodied guard. Cersei offered her suggestions: fortify the gates, ensure the pyromancers were prepared with wildfire if it came to a siege, keep the people in line with stern measures. Tywin assented. They moved in lockstep, father and daughter, forging a war plan. But behind Tywin's cool facade, cracks were forming. His plans rarely accounted for the speed and unity with which Dorne now acted. He had always considered Doran Martell a cautious man, not prone to rash decisions. Now that the snakes and Illyria fanned the flames, Tywin realized he might have underestimated the depth of Dornish wrath. Even so, the Lannisters had cunning on their side. They would attempt to use emissaries, promises, or coin to sway some Dornish lords away from the Martell cause. But the dungeons of King's Landing still held one of the Lannisters' own, and the taste of betrayal clung to the name. There would be no easy alliances for the crown now. Late-night councils dragged on, and the usual suavity in Tywin's posture seemed forcibly maintained. Jaime Lannister stood at his father's side during these war councils, gilded hand resting on his sword's pommel. But the Kingslayer found himself lost in thought, recalling Oberyn's furious grace during the duel, the swirl of the spear, the rhetorical barbs. He recalled how quickly that victory had become defeat. Dorne, likewise, might be underestimating the Lannisters. War made fools of many, and Jaime dreaded the slaughter to come. Overhead, the summer sun shone, hot enough to boil blood in its veins. Roads turned dusty, fields withered. The Dornish host, adapted to the oppressive heat, marched on with minimal rest, pushing their forces to an unprecedented speed. They would arrive at the outskirts of King's Landing in record time. Scouts reported that the Crown's host was trying to assemble near the Windwater, hoping to intercept them before they reached the city walls. But Prince Dorne, though hampered by gout, guided his commanders with the same slyness Oberyn had once displayed in a duel. They advanced in a feint east, drawing Lannister scouts off their direct path, then turned north at a crucial fork. By the time the Crown's banners realized the Dornish were outmaneuvering them, it was too late to form a solid line of defense. Skirmishes erupted in the fields. Oberyn Sand led cavalry charges that shattered smaller Lannister outposts. Nymeria Sand, or Chest, raided a nighttime raid on a supply caravan meant for the Crown's forces. Tyene Sand's infiltration units slipped into camps, poisoning the rations. The unstoppable momentum of these agile Dornish attacks forced the Lannisters to scatter, uncertain where to mount a proper stand. By the time the main Dornish force reached the rolling plains outside King's Landing, the Crown's army was in disarray. The city had hastily raised additional fortifications, but morale within the walls teetered. Flea Bottom bustled with panic. Tradesmen boarded up shops, fearful of what might happen when a full-blown war landed at their doorstep. The Red Keep locked its gates, archers on the battlements with arrows nocked and ready. Great siege engines, once used to repel Stannis Baratheon's assault, were wheeled into place. Cersei stood on a balcony above the castle gates, wine in hand, scanning the horizon with a mixture of dread and defiance. Tywin insisted that they still held the upper hand if they could force the Dornish into a siege. The city walls were thick, the population large enough to deter a prolonged investment, especially if disease took root in the invading camp. But the Martells did not arrive with the timidity of a typical besieging force. Their outriders galloped along the perimeter of the city, harassing any who ventured out. Soon, columns of Dornish infantry and cavalry took up positions on all major roads leading to King's Landing, effectively trapping the residents inside. Illyria gazed at the city from a hillock where the officers were meeting. The walls rose in the distance, the red stone towers glimmering in the sunlight. Each banner fluttering from those ramparts bore the golden lion of Lannister or the stag of Baratheon. Though Tommen sat the throne now, only a child, the Targaryen banners were but a memory from generations past, and the Lannister brand held dominion. She felt her heart clench. This was the lair of Oberyn's killers, the hive of betrayals that had devoured her love. She wanted to see it crumble. She wanted every Lannister removed from power and brought to their knees. Beside her, Oberyn spat on the ground, eager for a direct assault. Prince Dorne, more cautious, debated the best strategy. A siege could be long and costly, and his people had never liked the idea of laying in trenches, starving out a foe. Dorne's style of war was agile, preferring swift raids and cunning maneuvers. Yet to truly dethrone House Lannister, they might need to breach the walls and take the Red Keep by force. Late in the afternoon, a rider under a white flag emerged from the city's gate. He was escorted to the Dornish lines. The man, pale and trembling, brought a message. Tywin Lannister demanded to speak with Prince Dorne under a flag of truce to negotiate terms. The assembled Dornish lords hissed in derision. They had no interest in Tywin's terms. Illyria, however, convinced Dorne to at least hear what the hand of the king might offer. If they listened, perhaps they could glean some advantage or measure the Lannisters' desperation. So a neutral ground was chosen, a stretch of field between the city and the Dornish camp. Guards from both sides stood watch, forming two lines. Tywin Lannister arrived with an escort of knights and banners. He rode a grand warhorse, his posture rigid, face cold. Across from him, Prince Dorne remained in his palanquin, Hota at his side, spear axes planted in the ground. The sand snakes stood behind him, Illyria among them, every gaze seething with quiet hatred. Tywin spoke first, voice carrying in the hush. He said that war was needless, that Oberyn Martell's death had been a fair outcome of a trial by combat, and that the crown had no hand in it beyond the laws of the Seven Kingdoms. He tried to present an offer. The crown would pay reparations, gold to Dorne, and an official apology for any perceived slight. In exchange, the Dornish would withdraw. Prince Dorne listened, expression carefully neutral. When it was his turn to speak, he asked Tywin if he thought Dorne was so easily bought. "Did you believe gold could replace my brother's life? Did you believe an apology might seal the ruin you brought upon House Martell decades ago, culminating now in Oberyn's public butchery?" His voice trembled with contained emotion. "We have come for justice." Tywin's mouth twitched. Justice was a fragile concept, easily overshadowed by the demands of war. Tywin insisted that if Dorne continued this aggression, the realm would unite against them. But Dorne only smiled a thin smile. "The realm's memory is not so kind to House Lannister as you believe," he said, referencing the Red Wedding, the rumored manipulations at court, the many who had cause to resent the Lion. "Ask yourself who truly stands with you now." Tywin turned his gaze to Illyria, who stood near the prince's palanquin. She met his eyes unflinchingly, letting her loathing show. She could see the flicker of recognition in his stare. She had been present when Oberyn died, a silent witness to the cruelty of that so-called trial. He offered no words to her, no sign of remorse. Instead, he tried to appeal to Prince Doran's sense of caution. But the time for caution had passed. Every half-measure, every attempt at negotiation, had died with Oberyn's final breath. The meeting ended in an impasse. No handshake, no agreement, not even a pretense of civility. Tywin departed in anger, and Prince Dorne returned to his camp, teeth clenched. The die was cast. King's Landing would face the storm of Dorne. Word spread among the Dornish ranks that negotiations had failed. A thrill of excitement seized the men and women. At dusk, torches flared along the perimeter, a ring of fire around the city. The ground shook with the stamping of thousands of feet, the clang of steel. Night came, but no one slept easily on either side. Within the city, bells tolled ominously. The gold cloaks manned the walls, scanning the darkness for any sign of an advance. Civilians cowered in their homes, or else huddled in taverns, fearful that the next dawn might bring bloodshed like they had never seen. On the second night, the Dornish launched a calculated strike. Teams of engineers brought forth battering rams and portable siege towers under cover of darkness. Archers let loose a hail of flaming arrows to sow panic on the walls. Oberyn led a cavalry charge against a poorly defended gate, smashing into the outer guard post. The city's defenders retaliated with crossbow bolts, and the dull roar of war began to fill the midnight air. Illyria stood at a vantage point on a small rise, watching the flicker of flames dance along the city's battlements. Her fists clenched around the hilt of a dagger she had taken to carrying. She longed to see the Lannister banners torn down and the roar of their pride silenced. Thunderous booms echoed as the battering rams pounded at the gates. Shouts in the darkness. The stench of smoke drifted across the field. War had truly arrived at King's Landing once more. At dawn, the full scale of the skirmish was revealed. The Dornish had broken through an outer gatehouse but had not yet breached the main walls. Bodies lay strewn on the ground, gold cloaks and Dornish soldiers alike. Crows circled overhead. The city's garrison had pulled back to a more defensible position, preparing for another assault. Prince Dorne ordered the battered Dornish troops to regroup. He was not about to throw bodies at the walls in a costly frontal attack. Instead, he commanded Oberyn and Nymeria to lure the Lannister forces into small engagements outside the walls, where Dornish agility gave them an advantage. Tywin led infiltration squads, small groups of silent killers who scaled lesser walls or bribed their way through drainage tunnels. The city was vast, and not every inch could be guarded at all hours. Their plan was to sow chaos behind the walls, to force the defenders to split their attention. Meanwhile, the main army would pound at the gates. This multi-pronged assault was Oberyn's style of combat, amplified into a grand scale. A dozen serpent strikes, weaving unpredictably around the lion's claws. The infiltration squads had successes. Some members slipped into flea bottom, stirring discontent among the hungry poor. Rumors spread that the Lannisters were planning to ration food only for the noble districts, letting the commoners starve. That might or might not have been true, but the whisper was enough to spark riots. Mobs roamed the streets, looting shops, assaulting any guards in Lannister colors. Tywin Lannister, with a clenched jaw, ordered brutal crackdowns, sending gold cloaks to quell the unrest. But that only incited more fury. A swirl of chaos began swirling in King's Landing, reminiscent of the madness during the War of the Five Kings. Cersei grew anxious, Jaime furrowed his brow, and Tommen, barely more than a boy, watched in terror, understanding little of how close his kingdom was to collapse. While the city was embroiled in internal strife, Dornish engineers managed to position massive trebuchets within range of the walls. Soon, heavy stones slammed into the ramparts, shaking them. Part of the outer defenses crumbled. Another gate was set ablaze. The defenders fought valiantly. Crossbowmen rained bolts on the attackers. Scorpions launched giant spears at siege towers. Flaming barrels of pitch were rolled onto clusters of Dornish infantry. The battlefield was a cacophony of screams, the clash of steel, the pounding of siege weapons. Yet, methodically, the Dornish advanced. High on the city walls, archers lit arrows and fired volley after volley into the mass of attackers below, while mortar and shards of stone littered the interior. The gold cloaks scrambled to contain infiltration attempts, each alarm sounding from a different quarter, adding to the confusion. The Tyrell contingent, which had been in King's Landing for Margaery's betrothal to Tommen, realized they were being drawn into a losing fight. Mace Tyrell, having lost confidence in the Lannisters' ability to hold the city, kept his forces close to the Red Keep rather than risking them on the walls. The famed Tyrell cavalry was nowhere to be seen outside the gates, leaving the battered gold cloaks on their own. This angered Cersei, who berated Mace Tyrell as a coward. But he insisted his priority was to protect the king, meaning Tommen, meaning the keep. Margaery hovered near Tommen, attempting to comfort him. The boy king was trembling, pale as a wisp, tears at the corners of his eyes. Throughout it all, Tyrion Lannister languished in his cell, the sound of war echoing through the stones. He gleaned that the city was under siege, that the Dornish had come in greater numbers than anyone expected. His guards were changed often, each new shift bearing fresh bruises or soot from battle. He saw fear in their eyes, heard them mumble about the snakes, about savage skirmishes in the streets. Tyrion wondered if, amidst the chaos, an opportunity might arise. Perhaps Varys would intervene or Jaime. Hope was a dangerous thing, but he clung to it, for it was all that kept him from succumbing to despair in the gloom. If Dorne toppled House Lannister, Tyrion's life might end either way, but perhaps he could slip out in the confusion. He had no illusions that Illyria or the Sand Snakes held any fondness for him. He recalled Oberyn's last promise to bring justice for Elia, and how Tyrion's father was truly the one behind the horrors that befell her. Yet Tyrion had never favored that atrocity. Would they see the difference? Or would Lannister blood be the only distinction that mattered in this new reality? On the morning of the final breach, the city's defenders were stretched too thin. A massive combined assault targeted the King's Gate, battering rams, waves of infantry, archers thick in support. Under the cover of fog rolling in from Blackwater Bay, Tyene and her infiltration squads slipped into a tower by the mud gate. They overwhelmed the guards, then seized the mechanism that raised and lowered the portcullis. In the confusion, a portion of the gates opened. Dornish horsemen surged in, cutting down any who tried to raise the gate again. Once inside, the cavalry fanned out, swiftly capturing key intersections. The gold cloaks, outnumbered and demoralized by weeks of unsuccessful defense and internal riots, quickly broke ranks. Many threw down their weapons, preferring to yield rather than die. Civilians fled in all directions. The sight of the Dornish sun and spear streaming through the streets sparked panic, but it also sparked glimpses of relief among those who hated the Lannisters. Cersei, in the Red Keep, received the news that the gates had been breached. She turned pale. Tywin tried to rally the last of the Lannister loyalists. Jaime prepared the Kingsguard for a last-ditch defense. Mace Tyrell hesitated, weighing the risk to his men. If Dorne took the city, would they spare House Tyrell if he kept Tommen safe? The storming of the Red Keep seemed imminent. Outside its walls, the Dornish cavalry and infantry hammered at the main gates. Scorpions and archers on the keep's ramparts fired back, but the unstoppable tide had arrived. Prince Doran himself remained in camp, sending his chosen lords to command the final push, while Areo Hoda led a contingent of elite guards forward. Alleria rode with them, her face set in grim determination. She was no seasoned warrior, but she brandished a spear in honor of Oberyn, as if his spirit guided her. The sand snakes were scattered across the assault. Obara led the vanguard, thirsting for Lannister blood. Nymeria commanded archers to suppress the defenders. Tyene used her lethal knowledge of poisons to lay traps and sabotage the Red Keep's defenses from within. In the throne room, Tommen sat on the Iron Throne, tears sliding down his cheeks. The boy was nearly paralyzed with fear. Cersei stood beside him, refusing to abandon her son. Tywin paced near the dais, face ashen. He had stationed gold cloaks and Lannister guards throughout the keep, but they were too few to hold off the Dornish if the entire fortress fell. Jaime tried to calm Tommen, glancing at the gilded windows, which rattled from the impacts of siege weapons. The walls reverberated with the clamor of battle. Shouts could be heard in the lower corridors. Mace Tyrell hovered at the edges, uncertain how best to preserve House Tyrell's interests. He was no warrior at heart, but a lord who valued family alliances. At this moment, forging an alliance with Dorne seemed impossible, but aligning too closely with the Lannisters might bring ruin if the city fell. The final defenses crumbled around midday. Dornish soldiers, aided by the sabotage of infiltration squads, blasted open a side gate to the Red Keep's courtyard. Swarms of men flooded inside. The Lannister guards put up a ferocious fight, but were overwhelmed in the chaos. Soon the courtyard was lost. Archers atop the walls were cut down or forced to surrender. The main doors to the keep were battered. One after another, the majestic wooden barriers splintered. Alleria advanced behind a wedge of Dornish spearmen, her heart pounding in her ears. The chance to avenge Oberyn, truly avenge him, lay just beyond. She prayed to the Mother, the warrior, any deity that would listen, to grant her the strength to see it through. The final blow of a ram knocked the doors off their hinges, and Dornish warriors spilled into the grand foyer. Inside, Tywin Lannister's strategists tried to form one last stand near the throne room. Hallways echoed with the screams of dying men. Dornish foot soldiers advanced step by step. Some of the keep's staff barricaded themselves in storerooms, while others hid or fled. The clang of steel on steel reverberated in the great corridors, and tapestries were torn by stray arrows. A group of Lannister knights faced off against Nymeria Sand's archers at a corner, but a well-timed volley cut them down. Tyene slipped through side passages, systematically poisoning any pockets of resistance. Jaime Lannister, aware that the fight was lost, still made a stand with the Kingsguard in front of the throne room. When the double doors at the end of the hallway burst open, he saw Obara Sand at the forefront, shield braced, spear poised. Behind her marched Alleria, Prince Doran's bannermen, and a flood of Dornish steel. A tense hush descended as Obara and Jaime locked gazes. He had once bested the Smiling Knight in single combat, had faced the best in the realm. Now he fought left-handed, golden prosthetics strapped to his stump. Obara sneered. The Kingsguard fanned out around Jaime, but the ratio was poor, 8 white cloaks against dozens of Dornish spears. Still, Jaime tried to call for a parley to protect Tommen if nothing else. Obara spat on the floor. "Surrender the boy king," she hissed, "and the lives of you and your men may be spared. But Tywin, that one is ours." The other sand snakes, arriving from another corridor, stepped up behind her. The clang of footsteps filled the hall. Tywin's voice rang out, sweet and calm, calling Jaime by name, urging him to lay down his sword. The Kingslayer hesitated, duty warred with self-preservation. Yet in the end, the door to the throne room slammed open from within, and a voice called, "Enough!" Tywin Lannister emerged. At his side stood Cersei, pale but defiant, and Tommen clinging to his mother's skirts. Mace Tyrell lingered in the background, face drained of all color. Tywin's own guards flanked him, though they looked uncertain, glancing at the armed Dornish mass in the hallway. "Take the boy if that is your demand," Tywin said, his voice steady but hollow. "But you will not lay a hand on the king's family without dooming Dorne to chaos. The entire realm." He never finished his threat. The sand snakes advanced in unison, spears leveled. Ellaria, from the midst of them, let out a trembling breath. She saw Tywin's cold eyes, the same eyes that had orchestrated the death of Elia Martell, that had sanctioned the brutality inflicted by Gregor Clegane upon Oberyn. Here was the man who had torn her life apart, the man who had enthroned the Lannisters above all else by cunning and cruelty. Her hands shook with rage. Jaime tried to step in front of Tommen. For all his faults, he was a knight sworn to protect his king, especially a child. But Obara lashed out with her spear, forcing him back. The king's guard readied their swords, but they knew it was hopeless. Dornish soldiers swarmed from behind, sealing off escape. Tywin pressed a blade to Jaime's throat. "No more," she whispered. "Lay it down." Jaime let his sword clatter to the ground. Tywin's face betrayed a flicker of genuine fear for the first time. He tried to speak, but the sand snakes and the Dornish lords advanced. Ario Hoda came forward, standing like a giant behind Ellaria, silent as the grave. "Do you wish to kneel?" Ellaria asked, her voice low. "Do you wish to beg as Elia did? Will you ask for mercy for your grandson king, as Oberyn asked you for justice?" Tywin's jaw tightened, and Cersei's eyes widened, flicking between them. She tried to push Tommen behind her, but the boy whimpered. Ellaria took a trembling step closer. She could feel the ghosts of Oberyn and Elia at her shoulder. A hush had fallen, the kind of hush where a single breath might light a spark of violence. "You will kneel," she hissed, "and you will answer for your crimes." Prince Doran arrived, carried on a litter, though he halted just behind the throng. His face was etched with grief and rage, though a measure of caution still lived in his eyes. One final time he gave Tywin Lannister a chance to speak, to yield. Tywin lifted his chin proudly, but any illusions of victory had fled him. He said nothing, Sco. Ling at the Martells. Obara barked an order, and 2 Dornish soldiers forced Tywin onto his knees. Cersei shrieked, attempting to claw at them, but she was disarmed. Tommen sobbed, too young to comprehend the total unraveling of his dynasty. Jaime struggled, but Tywin's blade held him fast. Mace Tyrell lingered near the dais, apparently torn between intervening and self-preservation. The man who once boasted of Highgarden's wealth now stood as a powerless observer. Ellaria bent down so that her face was near Tywin's. She recalled how quietly he had orchestrated the horrors inflicted on Elia, how cunningly he had arranged Oberyn's downfall. "You stole my love," she whispered. "You robbed Dorne of one of its greatest sons. You have shown no remorse. Now your time is done. Dorne will see you pay in blood." Tywin clenched his teeth. For a moment, there was only the rasp of breath in that grand hallway. Then Ellaria drove her dagger into his chest. The hall erupted into an uproar. Cersei screamed, Tommen wailed, and Jaime roared in alarm, trying to lunge forward. But the sand snakes were ready. Obara's spear intercepted Jaime, while Tywin's blade pricked his neck, drawing blood. Nymeria's daggers pinned the Kingsguard behind them. The Lannister guards made a half-hearted attempt to rush in, but Dornish spears bristled. Tywin gasped, blood seeping through his fine doublet. The fabled Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in Westeros, fell to the stone floor. Ellaria took a trembling step back. Memories of Oberyn's laughter mingled with the horror of so much blood, but she found no regret. The Lannisters had sown the seeds of their own doom, and Dorne had reaped it. Cersei collapsed beside her father's body, eyes wild, hair disheveled, shrieking at Ellaria like a madwoman. Dornish soldiers seized her. Tommen screamed for help, but no one came to his aid. Mace Tyrell turned away, face pale. The realm had changed in an instant. Here, in the ashes of House Lannister's power, the Martells claimed their vengeance. Jaime was taken prisoner. The boy king, Tommen, was stripped from his mother's arms, placed in the custody of Prince Doran. An assurance that if the realm rose against Dorne, the child's life would be forfeit. The Red Keep's halls echoed with confusion and terror as Dornish banners were hoisted. Word spread like wildfire. Tywin Lannister was dead, slain by the paramour of Prince Oberyn in the very seat of the kingdom's power. Soldiers of House Martell formed ranks to secure the fortress. Surrender was demanded of any remaining loyalists. Some complied, others attempted to flee or fight, but the city was effectively under Dornish occupation. Prince Doran, though triumphant, still wore a mask of sorrow. He announced that justice had been served for Oberyn and Elia, for Rhaenys and Aegon. But the realm was not finished. He arranged for Cersei and Jaime to be locked away until a decision could be made regarding their fates. Mace Tyrell he invited to parley, seeking an accommodation that might avoid further bloodshed. Tommen, a frightened puppet, was carefully watched. If he cooperated, Doran might allow the boy to remain nominally king, but under Dornish regency, a reversal of power that would see Dorne at the apex of influence. Ellaria, raw with the adrenaline of revenge, found little comfort in the swirling politics. She had done what she set out to do. She had plunged a blade into the architect of Oberyn's suffering. It brought her no resurrection of her beloved, no return of the voice that once murmured in her ear, but it did bring a dark satisfaction. Oberyn's shade, wherever it wandered, might now rest a bit easier. Amid the city's chaos, the common folk, seeing that the Lannisters had fallen, erupted in an odd mixture of relief and dread. Some looted the remains of the Lion's Hold, others cowered in case the Martells turned on them. But Doran immediately declared that the small folk would not be harmed, that this was a war against those who committed crimes against his family, not an indiscriminate slaughter. Food stores, however, were now under Dornish command. The city guards who had not fought to the death were offered a chance to lay down arms and pledge loyalty to the new regime, or face imprisonment. Many bent the knee, wanting to avoid more bloodshed. The stench of death still lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke from the battered gates. In a matter of days, King's Landing began to settle into an uneasy occupation. Dornish forces patrolled the streets, stamping out riots. They posted watch at the gates, verifying who came and went. The Red Keep servants quickly learned to bow to Prince Doran's steward, who managed the daily affairs. Doran and the Sand Snakes moved to claim a portion of the fortress for their own. Ellaria found herself wandering the once Lannister corridors, reflecting on the ghosts that clung to these walls. She passed the courtyard where Oberyn had walked with such swagger, mocking the king's guard. She imagined the faint echo of his laughter in the halls. There was no man so full of life and brilliance as her Prince of Dorne, and now only memory remained. But he was avenged. No matter the cost, no matter the consequences, that was a victory she held close to her chest. If the entire realm shook in the wake of House Martell's ascendance, let it. The Lannisters had been toppled, their cornerstone of power shattered. As the new order took shape, negotiations commenced between Doran Martell and the major houses. Mace Tyrell grudgingly recognized the new status quo, anxious to preserve his family's position, and Marjorie's chance to remain queen. Dorne's price was steep, demanding a reshuffling of the small council and an official recognition of the atrocities committed under Tywin's command. The Stormlands, reeling from their own struggles, had little appetite for challenging Dorne, especially with the boy king in Dornish custody. The North was embroiled in its own problems, distant from these southern storms. Gradually, an alliance of convenience formed around Dorne's hold on King's Landing, if only to prevent further chaos. Some lords eyed the Dornish occupation as an opportunity to break Lannister dominance. The Iron Throne might remain under Tommen, but in truth it belonged to Prince Doran's regency now. The seat that had once been a fearsome lion's den was overshadowed by the sun and spear. Within the damp dungeons of the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister and Cersei raged against their captors. The siblings had lost everything. Their father, their power, their illusions of unassailable status. Cersei's screams of indignation rebounded off the stone walls, but no one heeded her. Jaime grew pensive, bitterness sinking in. Tyrion, ironically, found himself freed by the chaos. Varys had orchestrated his escape amidst the swirl of infiltration. He slipped away, disappearing into the labyrinth of King's Landing's secret passages. Some said he fled the city altogether. Others believed he might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to shape events. In either case, the three Lannister siblings who once had power beyond measure were scattered. One missing, two imprisoned. In this new realm under Martell dominance, the name Lannister carried a heavy shame. While the city slowly adjusted, Illyria often retreated to the balcony of the royal apartments, gazing out over the sprawl of rooftops. The sun's light gilded the city in early mornings, making the red stones glisten. She remembered how Oberyn had once told her that King's Landing was a viper's nest, and that if you showed fear, you would be devoured. Now it was they, Dorne, who wielded the fangs. Yet a part of her ached, wishing that Oberyn could stand beside her to see the Lannisters brought to heel. Sometimes, she closed her eyes and felt the ghost of his hand on her shoulder. Other times, she sensed only emptiness. The sand snakes, too, felt that yawning absence of their father. They took what satisfaction they could in the victory, but the knowledge that Oberyn would never see this day cast a pall over the moment. Tyene sometimes visited Illyria in her chambers, offering quiet companionship. Nymeria found purpose in the logistical tasks of stabilizing the city. Obara roamed the keep, restless for more battles, though the lion was already slain. Prince Doran, for his part, navigated the complexities of ruling King's Landing as a liberator from a foreign region. He had no interest in wearing the crown or claiming it for himself. He insisted Tommen remain king, at least officially, to maintain the illusion of continuity. But the small council bowed to him, and any who defied him faced the spears of Dorne. Many in the city's aristocracy grumbled, but they recognized the reality. Only fools challenged a conquering army. Doran promised them that he would not bring further ruin to King's Landing if they cooperated, that he merely sought to redress old wounds. Yet vengeance, once begun, had a way of echoing through the corridors of power. Cersei's trial loomed, Jaime's fate hung by a thread, and the realm at large watched to see if Dorne would rule with justice or cruelty. In the weeks after the siege, the city saw changes reminiscent of a new spring after a harsh winter. Dornish influence touched its markets. Spiced wines, saffron-laced dishes, the bright fabrics of the desert. Soldiers from Dorne patrolled with a distinct southern flair, forging uneasy relationships with the local population. Resistance flared here and there, but it was quickly quelled. The large-scale oppression typical of a Lannister regime was not repeated. Instead, the Martells, remembering how fearsome retribution could become, walked a careful line, hoping to avoid sowing seeds of revolt. Still, it was an occupation. No one mistook that, but it was perhaps less brutal than the city had known under Joffrey or the whim of Tywin's manipulations. Illyria took no official title in the new order, but she was regarded with a mixture of fear and respect. Those who witnessed Tywin's final moments spread rumors that she had stabbed him through the heart with no hesitation. Some claimed she whispered Oberyn's name as she delivered the blow, others that she spat upon him. The story grew in the telling, conferring upon Illyria a fearsome reputation she had never actively sought. She was the paramour who avenged the Red Viper, the woman unafraid to stand against the lion. People gave her a wide berth in the corridors, seldom meeting her eyes, as if worried that her wrath might still burn. In truth, Illyria found herself grappling with the aftermath. Vengeance was sweet in the moment, but now she wondered how to fill the hole Oberyn left in her life. She tried to lose herself in small acts of compassion, ensuring the orphanages had adequate bread, giving silver to the impoverished. She had no illusions that this would bring her peace, but it kept her from drowning in the ghosts of the past. Above all, though, the echoes of war still rattled through the land. The Riverlands, ravaged by previous conflicts, remained uncertain. The Vale had so far kept to itself under Peter Baelish's guidance, but now might see opportunities in the new power balance. The North, embroiled in its own wars, was distant. The Iron Islands rarely passed up a chance for pillage when the capital was in flux. Dorne Martell anticipated further strife. Toppling House Lannister was only the first step. Ruling or guiding the realm through the aftermath was another. But for the moment, the triumphant hush lingered in King's Landing. The lion's roar was silenced. The viper had struck. On a cool morning in late summer, Ellaria stood on a balcony where the sun fell in a gentle pattern across the floor. She held a cup of Dornish red, breathing in its aroma. It reminded her of Oberyn, of nights spent entwined in passion, or afternoons drinking together under the desert sun. She sipped the wine, feeling its warmth, and thought of the life they had once shared. Footsteps behind her drew her from memory. It was Prince Dorne, leaning on a cane, his face solemn. "It never truly ends, does it?" he asked quietly. "We have our victory, but the consequences are like ripples in a pond. Soon, other houses will maneuver against us." Ellaria nodded, understanding. "We wanted justice," she said softly, "and we have it, but the cost." She let the words trail off. No one could bring Oberyn back. He was a brilliant star snuffed out. The entire realm might change, but that absence would remain. Dorne placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We must ensure that in seeking revenge, we do not become what we despised." He spoke with a hint of sorrow. For all his caution, he had sanctioned a war of vengeance. He had allowed the fury of Oberyn's memory to ignite his people. Now he carried that weight. Ellaria bowed her head. "We have done what needed to be done. Tywin Lannister deserved no better." She thought of Elia Martell, of the children slaughtered. She thought of Oberyn's eyes alight with righteous fury. She took another sip of wine. "We have to believe that we can shape a fairer world from the ashes of the old." But a deeper part of her wondered if a fairer world was truly possible. The cycle of retribution might only spin onward, unstoppable. In the moonlit nights that followed, King's Landing seemed quieter. The Dornish soldiers enforced a curfew, and the rowdy taverns saw fewer patrons. The sense of dread that used to hover under Joffrey's rule was replaced by a different tension. The city was in the hands of outsiders, and no one knew how long that would last or what it would bring. Yet the small folk did appreciate that the rampages of the gold cloaks had ceased, and that bread rations, while limited, were fairly distributed. Spies from other houses wove through the crowd, gauging the new regime's vulnerabilities. Whispers drifted on the night air that somewhere in the east, Daenerys Targaryen might still gather strength, or that in the far north the White Walkers threatened. Life had an odd way of continuing, no matter who claimed the Iron Throne. But for Dorne, this moment was everything. It was a catharsis after decades of injustice. The Martell banners flying above the Red Keep was an unprecedented sight in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Though Prince Dorne had not declared an independent Dorne, he was content to rule as regent with Tommen as a puppet king. This was a quiet revolution. The Lannisters had always believed themselves untouchable, but in one swift campaign, their hold on the realm was shattered. House Martell, once underestimated, had proven the price of burying a viper under the hot sands without finishing the job. Vengeance, so long delayed, had come swiftly when the moment was right. Across the city, the presence of the sand snakes reminded everyone that this was a new era. Obara, often bruised and bandaged, swaggered through training yards, ensuring the city guard was retrained in the Dornish style. Nymeria made more subtle shifts, forging alliances with cunning courtiers, smoothing the edges of Dornish rule. Tyene tended to the poor in the city's winding alleyways, offering potions and remedies, a surprising twist to her reputation as a poisoner, yet a demonstration that the same hands that bring death can also bring mercy. Their father, the Red Viper, had always embraced life passionately even as he thirsted for justice. They sought to preserve that legacy, each in their own way. Ellaria found herself alone often, not out of isolation but by preference. She needed the quiet to sift through her thoughts. She knew that she was no lady of the court, nor did she wish to be. Her power stemmed from Oberyn's memory and the role she played in exacting his vengeance. She had no illusions about holding official station. Yet her influence was undeniable, and the people around her treated her like a symbol. She walked the corridors as if she were wrapped in Oberyn's shadow, a constant reminder of why Dorne had marched to war. She heard the hush that followed her steps, the whispers in the corners. In a realm that thrived on fear and adulation, such a reputation could be a potent shield and a burden. Sometimes at dusk, she made her way to the courtyard where a statue of a Targaryen king had once stood. It had been demolished in Robert's rebellion, but the base remained. She would sit there and watch the setting sun paint the sky in shades of pink and orange reminiscent of Dorne's deserts. The heat in King's Landing felt stifling, but not in the same welcoming way the Dornish heat did. There was a difference in the dryness, in the flavor of the air. She longed for the water gardens, for the soothing reflection of sunlight on cool pools. But for now, she remained in the city that had cost Oberyn his life. Each time she closed her eyes, she remembered the moment his laughter died, and each time she whispered to the wind, "We have avenged you, my love. May you rest in peace." One day, Prince Dorne summoned Ellaria to the small council chamber, once Tywin Lannister's seat of power. As she entered, she felt a swirl of emotions, recalling how the old lion once surveyed this very table. Now, a Dornish retinue occupied these seats, along with certain lords from other regions who had sworn temporary fealty to preserve their status. Dorne beckoned her closer. He spoke of returning the seat of regency to Tommen's official caretaker, but with strict conditions that assured Dornish oversight. He also spoke of the broader realm, hinting that a reconciliation might be sought with certain houses if it ensured peace. Ellaria listened, but found her mind drifting. She cared little for the intrigues of state. She had wanted Oberyn's killers to pay. That had been her singular focus. Now that it was done, the intricacies of forging a stable monarchy almost felt hollow. Yet she stayed. She had lost Oberyn, but she would not abandon the Sand Snakes, not leave Prince Dorne to navigate these waters alone. She owed her loyalty to the family that had embraced her as one of their own. Later that evening, she approached Dorne in his private solar, the windows open to the evening breeze. Candlelight flickered across his thoughtful face. He looked up from parchments detailing alliances, trade routes, and letters from all corners of Westeros. She saw the weight upon him, the painful ache in his joints and the heavier ache of responsibility. Quietly, she asked if he regretted bringing war upon the capital. His eyes drifted to a half-burned candle. "I regret that Oberyn is not here to see the outcome," he said. "But we had no choice. The Lannisters forced our hand. They spilled Martell blood one time too many." Ellaria nodded. "He always said we had to do more than remember Elia," she said. "He had to fight for her. He tried, in the end, to bring the mountain's crimes to light. We did our part in his name." A tear threatened to escape her eye, but she held it back. She wanted to stand resolute. "Now we reshape the realm, or as much of it as we can. In Oberyn's memory, let us at least try not to repeat the Lannisters' cruelty." Doran's expression softened in gratitude. "We shall try," he agreed, "though these 7 kingdoms have a history of swallowing good intentions. We must be vigilant." Then he offered her a small, sad smile, as if acknowledging that Oberyn would have turned the entire city into a carnival of revelry and retribution, balancing feasts and battles with equal enthusiasm. Without him, their victory felt muted, a half-celebration overshadowed by loss. A few days later, the city stirred with rumors of an impending public pronouncement. In the courtyard of the Red Keep, where once Joffrey had hosted deranged spectacles, Prince Doran and Ilaria stood on a raised platform. A scattering of highborn lords, hedge knights, and small folk had gathered in the blistering sun. The heads of the gold cloaks, now restructured with Dornish command, flanked them. Some scowled, some seemed resigned. Doran, leaning on his cane, proclaimed the official end of open hostilities. The boy king, Tommen, would remain upon the throne under Dornish regency until he came of age. House Martell demanded no further vengeance upon the city or its people, only the acceptance of the new order. Any that rebelled would be crushed. Yet there would be no mass punishments or executions, only the trial of certain high individuals who had orchestrated the murder of Elia Martell and her children, as well as the savage death of Prince Oberyn. Doran's eyes swept the crowd. Everyone knew that Tywin Lannister, the principal culprit, was already dead. Gregor Clegane had been mortally wounded in the duel, though rumors said Qyburn tried to perform unspeakable experiments on him. Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister were in chains, awaiting their fate. Their trial would come in due time. After the pronouncement, a subdued cheer went up. Some merely bowed in acquiescence, others whispered among themselves. Dornish troops stood watch, ensuring no upheaval disrupted the assembly. Doran then gestured for Ilaria to speak, to share a final word if she wished. She hesitated, not used to addressing crowds, especially not for matters of state. But she recalled Oberyn's flamboyance, the way his voice rose clear and confident when addressing a gathering. She stepped forward. "I do not come here as your queen, nor your ruler," she began, voice slightly trembling but firming as she continued. "I stand here as a woman who lost the man she loved to injustice, to cruelty, and to a system that allowed the powerful to crush whomever they pleased. We in Dorne have suffered that injustice for too long. We came to King's Landing not for mindless slaughter, but for the justice your realm never gave Elia Martell, and never gave Oberyn. Now it has been taken, if not given. The sun and spear flies over these ramparts. May it stand as a reminder that no one is beyond the reach of consequence." She paused, sweeping her gaze over the faces, seeing fear and awe mingled. "Yet I also ask you to set aside vengeance, if you can, in the days ahead. We have proven our point. We have seen enough blood to fill rivers. Let us not drown the kingdom in it. Let us instead try to find a future that is kinder." Prince Oberyn lived passionately, loved fiercely. He would not want endless death. He wanted life in all its fullness. In his name, let us be better than those who came before. She finished, exhaling heavily, and stepped back. She did not know if her words would resonate, but at least she had tried to voice the hope that Dorne might not become another oppressive force. The crowd murmured. Some nodded while others looked skeptical. War's scars were not easily healed. In the weeks that followed, the city settled into an uneasy peace, overshadowed by the knowledge that House Martell now held the reins. Many Lannister loyalists fled, discarding their lion-crested cloaks. The new city guard bore a sigil that combined the royal stag with the Dornish sun and spear, a symbol of the forced union. Cersei languished in a tower cell, raving with fury and heartbreak. Jaime was allowed a measure of dignity, spared from a dungeon cell, but remained a prisoner all the same. Tommen was paraded at official events as the king, but the real power rested with Prince Doran's council. The boy, too timid to resist, simply did as he was told. Outside the walls, the realm trembled at the shift. Many lords weighed their loyalty, considering whether to revolt or to bend. The unstoppable unity of Dorne that had toppled the Lannisters was a grim lesson for any who doubted the Martells. For now, most abided by the new order, biding their time. They had seen enough war. Let the snakes and their allies rule for a while. Inevitably, storms would come again to reshape the political landscape. For Ilaria, there were days when she roamed the Red Keep's gardens, inhaling the scent of foreign flowers. Sometimes, she visited the small sept to light a candle for Oberyn. Other times, she lingered on the ramparts, looking at the city below. She thought of the day Oberyn first arrived in King's Landing for the wedding of Joffrey and Margaery. How proud and fiery he had been, how sure he was of his own ability to achieve justice. In the end, it had been his downfall, and yet, ironically, his death became the spark that ignited Dorne's fury and led to the Lannisters' downfall. He had lost the duel, but he had won, in a sense, beyond the grave. The man who prized love and revenge in equal measure had found both in the final accounting. His beloved was safe, and his murderers lay in ruin. The daily tasks of occupying the city continued. Rationing bread, repairing gates, ensuring the aqueducts functioned. A hush had fallen over the riotous capital. The courtiers who once thrived on the Lannisters' patronage scrambled for favor with the Martells now. Some tried to flatter Ellaria with gifts, praising her bravery, but she found their words hollow. She remembered the faces of those who had laughed at Oberyn's defeat, who had smirked at his pleas for admission of guilt. She had no interest in hearing their praises now that the tide had turned. Time moved, and the memory of war lingered. The battered walls of King's Landing bore fresh scorch marks and collapsed sections. Craftsmen worked day and night to restore them. The markets slowly regained color, as Dornish spices and silks mingled with local produce, forging a strange blend of tastes and customs. The sunsets over Blackwater Bay looked the same as ever, but the intangible sense of power had shifted. Ships that sailed into port found a city under new management. Some of those vessels discreetly carried envoys from other lands, bravos, pentos, even rumors of a Targaryen spymaster or a Baratheon loyalist. They all wanted to see if House Martell would remain on top. Within the keep, Ellaria, the Sand Snakes, and Prince Doran watched, planned, and steered the realm's uncertain future. They had toppled a dynasty that once seemed unbreakable. But forging a new age was a precarious endeavor. A slip here or a misstep there might bring new foes down upon them. Yet Dorne had claimed its vengeance, a victory that for decades seemed impossible. The ghosts of Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon, the memory of Oberyn's bright smile, all found a measure of rest in the knowledge that the ones responsible for their suffering had been brought to ruin. If war raged anew tomorrow, it would not be the same war. The lion had fallen, its roar silenced by the viper's strike. In the end, when Ellaria closed her eyes at night, she felt Oberyn's presence in her dreams, his laughter echoing amid the scorching dunes. She saw him standing tall, spear in hand, free at last of the torment that once weighed on his soul. And in those fleeting dreams, she heard him whisper, "We did it. We made them answer." And she whispered back, "Yes, my love, we did." Ellaria Sands stood on the Red Keep's highest balcony as dawn broke over King's Landing, the sky tinted with subtle pinks and oranges that reminded her of desert blossoms in Dorne. The morning air was quiet, carrying only distant hints of the city's clamor. Vendors opening their stalls, caged animals grunting in flea bottom, a single bell tolling from the great September. The hush felt unearthly in a city so often choked with the press of humanity. But since the Dornish had taken the capital, life had become more subdued. Whether that silence was a result of fear or reluctant acceptance, Ellaria could only guess. She ran a hand along the stone parapet, remembering the night she had stood on a different balcony, vowing vengeance for Oberyn Martell. That vow had been kept. Sooner, more ferociously than any in King's Landing had expected. In the weeks since Prince Doran and the Sand Snakes took power, the city had settled into an uneasy occupation, battered gates still under repair, scorched walls half rebuilt. Obara, Nymeria, and Tyene came and went about their tasks, each fulfilling a different role in Dorne's victory. Doran remained in the Red Keep, laboring to consolidate his hold upon the realm's tangled politics. And Ellaria, she lived day by day, trying to reconcile her thirst for retribution with the quiet ache of what came after. A gentle sound of footsteps approached from behind. Ario Hoda, ever watchful, cleared his throat softly to announce himself. Though his presence was imposing, tall frame, broad shoulders, the long axe slung over his back, he was surprisingly light on his feet. Ellaria turned to face him, seeing the reflection of early sunlight on his armor. On the breastplate, newly painted, was the sun and spear of House Martell. The same sigil now fluttered from the castle battlements, where once the Lion of Lannister had waved over the city. "My lady," he said quietly, bowing his head in respect. "Prince Dorne summons you to the council chamber." His voice was low, gentle, at odds with the deadly strength in his arms. Areo bore no ill will toward King's Landing or its people, but he had carried out Doran's orders without question when they stormed the keep. A living reminder of how deeply loyalty and duty could shape a man. Ellaria set her gaze once more on the waking city. "I'll come," she answered. Then, more softly, "Thank you, Captain." She pushed off from the parapet and let him escort her back into the keep's corridors. Sunlight still slanted through arrow loops in the thick stone walls, glinting on the polished floors. Servants in Dornish attire had begun to replace some of the castle staff, though plenty of local men and women remained, those who had no reason to flee or who preferred new masters over no masters at all. They bowed or curtsied as Ellaria passed, their eyes lowered. Some looked fearful, others merely curious. The story of Tywin Lannister's final moment had spread like wildfire. How Ellaria Sand had driven a dagger into his chest, fulfilling the vengeance Oberyn had died seeking. To some, Ellaria was a folk heroine. To others, she was a terrifying figure, the paramour who slew a legend. She felt their stares like pinpricks on her skin. When Areo opened the doors to the small council chamber, formerly Tywin's domain, Ellaria was greeted by the murmur of conversation. Prince Dorne sat at the head of the table. In contrast to the austere garb of the Lannisters, he wore a robe of flowing Dornish silk, embroidered with subtle sunbursts around the cuffs. A cane of polished oak rested against the arm of his seat. Gout pained him, though he never let the discomfort sway his decisions. Nearby, Oberyn Sand lingered in partial armor, arms folded across her chest, foot tapping the floor in impatience. Nymeria Sand was present too, dressed in a close-fitting tunic and breeches, her high sandals laced up to the knee. Tyene was absent. Rumor said she was tending to street orphans in some remote quarter of the city, or possibly gathering scraps of information from half-sympathetic septas. Dorne often encouraged her to use her cunning quietly. Gathered around the table were a few other figures. Lord Dago's Manwoody, who had marched with the Martells, Lord Ironwood's steward representing one of Dorne's oldest houses, and 2 Tyrell envoys standing uneasily off to the side. Mace Tyrell himself rarely joined these councils in person since the siege ended. His pride had been bruised, but he remained in King's Landing to keep an eye on Queen Marjorie and young King Tommen. For now, the Tyrells were allies out of necessity, but Ellaria trusted them no more than she would trust a nest of scorpions. "Ellaria," Dorne said, lifting his hand in greeting, "thank you for joining us." When she took a seat, he waved to the Tyrell envoys. "Sirs Allister and Garibald have brought new proposals from Lord Tyrell regarding the future shape of this regency. They say he wishes to ease the city's burdens and ensure the smooth collaboration of our 2 great houses." Oberyn snorted. Collaboration. Fancy word for Tyrell meddling. She made no attempt to lower her voice. The Tyrell envoys stiffened, exchanging offended glances. Oberyn rarely hid her contempt for alliance games. Nymeria laid a calming hand on her sister's arm, but Oberyn scowled. One of the Tyrell envoys, a narrow-faced man with ink stains on his fingers, cleared his throat. "Our lord is committed to preserving stability, Prince Dorne. The small folk have suffered enough unrest. We believe that the presence of Tyrell bannermen in the city can help quell any lingering discontent among those loyal to the late hand." He tried not to let his voice waver at the mention of Tywin. "We also propose a modest levy to finance repairs to the harbor and the walls, ensuring King's Landing remains well defended." "A levy upon whom?" Ellaria asked quietly. The man faltered. "Why, upon the city's merchants primarily, with a small duty on ships arriving from the narrow sea. Our own coffers would match that contribution, of course." Ellaria's eyes flicked to Dorne, measuring his reaction. The prince's calm expression seldom gave away his thoughts. "The city's merchants are recovering from weeks of chaos," she said. "Many lost wagons or shops in the assault. Asking them for coin now could push some into ruin. Would House Tyrell truly provide an equal share?" A muscle in the envoy's cheek twitched. "Of course, my lady. Lord Tyrell's generosity knows no bounds. He only wishes to help the city rebuild." Doran rubbed his chin, then lifted a parchment from the table. "We will review his terms. However, let us not forget that House Tyrell has profited greatly from the Lannister alliance. The crown's debts to the Iron Bank are massive, and the last war left the realm unsettled. If Lord Tyrell genuinely seeks to restore prosperity, I shall propose that the majority of this levy come from a reallocation of certain crownlands' incomes, once reserved for Lannister endeavors, and from the Tyrell treasury. The city merchants will pay only a fraction, so they can recover." He set the parchment down with a soft slap. "That, sirs, is a more balanced approach." The envoys' faces reddened, but they bowed stiffly. "We will convey your position to Lord Tyrell," the narrow-faced man said, swallowing hard. Oberyn smirked as if to say, "That's how one deals with Highgarden's puffery." But Doran, always diplomatic, offered a gentle nod, signaling that the meeting would soon close. The Tyrell men took their leave, escorted by a pair of Dornish guards, though they did not look pleased by the negotiation's outcome. Ellaria watched them depart, thinking how precarious these alliances were. Months ago, the Tyrells had thrown in their lot with the Lannisters, marrying Margaery to first Joffrey, then Tommen. Now, with Tywin dead and the Red Keep under Dornish rule, the Tyrells danced on a new tightrope. They would not relinquish their power easily. When the chamber doors shut, Oberyn exhaled sharply. "I hate these endless talks," she snapped. "It's a parade of shifty-eyed fools trying to claw back bits of influence now that the lion's fangs are broken. We should let them all quake in fear a while longer." Doran's brow furrowed. "And then what? Invite more rebellion? We must maintain our advantage, Oberyn, without becoming tyrants ourselves. Fear alone breeds resentment." "They still resent us," Oberyn said, crossing her arms again. "But fine. I'll leave the talking to you and Nymeria. Let me handle the next band of old knights who still think the Lannisters will rise again. I'll show them the Dornish style of conversation." A faint smile played at Doran's lips, though worry lingered behind his eyes. He turned toward Ellaria. "There is another matter. The Iron Bank of Bravos has sent a letter of warning. Before his demise, Tywin Lannister had begun renegotiating the crown's debts. Now they question the legitimacy of any new arrangement under our regency." Ellaria steeled herself. The Iron Bank had a formidable reputation. If the crown defaulted, the bank funded the crown's enemies. They might try to back some other claimant to the throne if they think Tommen is compromised. "That is my fear," Doran said. "Bravos could align with Stannis Baratheon, or even encourage one of the remaining Targaryen pretenders rumored to dwell overseas. If they decide Tommen's rule under Dornish guardianship is unstable, we could face foreign-backed conflict." Oberyn made a face. "Then we show Bravos what it means to anger Dorne. Let them send their sellswords if they like." But Doran shook his head. "We are strong, but we cannot fight every corner of the world. Bravos has gold to spare, sell sales, alliances across Essos. We must be prudent. I plan to send a carefully chosen envoy to Bravos, someone measured and intelligent who can promise partial repayment, smoothing over their concerns." He paused, gaze drifting to Ellaria. "I know you despise the dance of diplomacy here, Ellaria, but you were Oberyn's partner, and you understand how to read people. You have a gift for disarming hostility by addressing it plainly. Would you consider going to Bravos in my stead?" Ellaria's lips parted in surprise. "Me? You want me to leave King's Landing?" Nymeria watched her with thoughtful curiosity, while Oberyn bristled, perhaps unhappy that Ellaria would be singled out for an important mission instead of a Dornish lord or another of Oberyn's daughters. Doran spread his hands gently. "It would only be for a time. Our rule here is fresh, and we must prevent the Iron Bank from undermining it. You have a personal stake in seeing the realm stabilized, if only so Oberyn's victory endures. There is no one else I trust more to convey that sincerity." Ellaria frowned, torn between the desire to remain near Oberyn's memory, this city where he had died, and the call of duty. She had never relished the intricacies of alliances, yet Prince Doran was right. If the Iron Bank threw its might behind a rival king, all their work to topple the Lannisters might go up in flames. "If you believe I can help, I'll go," she said quietly. "Though I've never negotiated with Braavosi bankers in my life." Doran nodded gravely. "We'll give you letters of introduction and a retinue that ensures your safety. The Braavosi respect confidence, and more importantly, they respect coin. We can arrange partial shipments of gold, perhaps from the Tyrell's deep coffers. Concessions, too. The crown owes them much, but we can show we have not forgotten our obligations. The key is to buy time. Time to stabilize the capital, to ensure no other rebellion thrives." She hesitated, thinking of Oberyn. It felt wrong to leave the seat of his vengeance so soon. But might traveling abroad bring her a measure of perspective? Here, in these halls, she was haunted by the memory of the mountain's final blow day and night. "Very well," she said. "I will do it." Obara exhaled, clearly frustrated that she was not the one venturing out. Nymeria gave a small, approving nod. "Braavos is a city of illusions," Nymeria said, "full of masks and riddles. You'll fit right in, if you rely on your wit and keep your eyes open." Doran drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "This will take time to arrange. Meanwhile, we should discuss the matter of a formal trial for Cersei Lannister. The city grows restless, and rumors abound that we're holding her unlawfully." At that, Obara's lips curled. "She's a prisoner of war. We owe her nothing more than the bare courtesy she gave my father." Her tone was scathing. She never hesitated to mock Oberyn or to gloat at his end. Doran responded in a gentle but firm voice. "If we are to rule, we must appear more just than the Lannisters ever were. We promise trials for those personally responsible for Elaya's murder and Oberyn's death. Gregor Clegane is no longer truly among the living. His fate is sealed by that wound he took in the duel. Tywin met his end by Illyria's hand. That leaves us with Cersei, who abetted many Lannister crimes, though not always openly. If we simply execute her, we feed the rumor that Dorne is savage and lawless. But a public trial under the watch of the faith might send a different message, that we have come to show justice, not to emulate the Lannisters' cruelty." Nymeria's eyes narrowed with caution. "Involving the faith is always tricky. If the High Septon or his devoted priests sense an opportunity to exert more control, they'll seize it. Still, we do need legitimacy." Illyria found the mention of Cersei's fate stirring mixed emotions. Part of her wanted the woman dead for the role she played in Oberyn's downfall. Even if Gregor Clegane's hands had delivered the blow, it was Cersei's father who engineered the so-called trial. Yet Illyria recalled the hollow feeling after Tywin's death. Vengeance never truly healed the wound. "A trial might be wise," she said, "but it must be real, not a hollow farce. If we stage a trial with a predetermined verdict of execution, it will appear no different than the Lannister mock trials we once despised." Obara looked away, muttering under her breath, but she offered no open challenge. Doran nodded. "We will ensure her guilt is laid bare for all to see. There is no shortage of evidence. Her involvement in Tyrion's trial, her complicity in Joffrey's cruelties, her knowledge of Elaya's murderers. If we handle it properly, the outcome will be just, and the realm will witness that Dorne does not murder prisoners in the dark." "Where is Cersei kept now?" Illyria asked. "In the royal apartments under guard," Doran answered. "She is allowed small comforts, as we are not torturers, but her windows are barred, and the corridor is watched by our spearmen day and night. She rages at them, or so I'm told." A thin line formed at the edge of his mouth, betraying his own flicker of anger. "She must be tried soon. The city whispers that the new regime fears her too much to bring her forth, or that we mean to use her as a bargaining chip. Let us show we fear nothing." Obara's foot tapped again. "Let her squeal in front of every eyewitness. I'll stand there to remind her how she laughed when father fell." Doran raised a hand to temper her fury. "We'll have the faith preside. Perhaps the new High Septon, whomever that spineless council of most devout selected after the last was removed, will want a demonstration of piety. That can be arranged. Once all is in order, we'll hold the trial in the Great September." The entire city can witness it." He paused, shifting the weight off his bad foot. "For now, that is enough. We have 1,000 tasks awaiting us. I'll speak with the stewards. Ilaria will coordinate your journey to Bravos soon. Obara, Nymeria, continue your work securing the city's defenses. Ario, help me to my solar, please." They stood. Ario Hoda assisted the prince to his feet, and Nymeria offered her arm as well. Once they shuffled out, Ilaria noticed Obara still bristling near the door, expression tight. But her anger was no longer directed solely at the Tyrells or at the idea of a trial. There was a flicker of something else, maybe frustration that Prince Dorne chose the path of public justice instead of royal retribution. Ilaria understood. Vengeance had been the fire that burned in the Sand Snake's hearts, just as it had in Oberyn's. Letting that fire be tamed by formalities felt unnatural. Yet, as Ilaria left the chamber, she reminded herself that this was what Oberyn often spoke of, the difference between savage cruelty and the righteous pursuit of justice. He had dueled Gregor Clegane openly, naming his crimes for all to hear. If Dorne now stooped to hidden murders and unscrupulous butchery, then Oberyn's death meant little. Better to display the Martell sense of honor in plain sight, and let the realm see the difference between vipers who kill for a cause and lions who kill to hide their guilt. She wandered deeper into the keep, her thoughts drifting to the days ahead. The trial of Cersei Lannister would loom large. If the city saw justice done, perhaps that would quell some portion of the unrest. Still, part of her dreaded the spectacle. She recalled how Tyrion's trial had been twisted into a puppet show, how the Red Viper's challenge had ended in that nightmarish moment. A pang of sorrow rippled through her. At least Oberyn would never witness further corruption in that cursed throne room. Jaime Lannister stood in a torchlit corridor deep beneath the Red Keep. He had been taken from the cell he shared with his sister not long ago, marched through winding passages by a squad of Dornish guards. Their faces were impassive. One had removed the swords from Jaime's belt. He was left with only a short dagger strapped to his golden hand. They had not bound him, but it hardly mattered. 6 spears pointed at his back were a more powerful restraint than any rope. At length, the guards stopped at a small door near the end of the corridor. One rapped on the heavy wood. A voice from inside called, "Enter." When the guard eased the door open, Jaime was gently prodded through. He found himself in an office of sorts, cluttered with dusty ledgers, old maps, and a single torch in a bracket. One of the walls had an open arrow slit, letting in a faint draft of fresh air. By that meager light, he recognized the tall, lean silhouette of Nymeria Sand, Oberyn's daughter with the signature dark hair and golden skin. Another figure, a man in more formal Dornish attire, a steward of House Martell perhaps, stood behind a table. Jaime took in the scene warily. "If you plan to kill me, you might at least offer me a chair." Nymeria's lips curved. "We plan no such thing today, Kingslayer." She gestured for him to stand near the table. "Though it might please some of our folk if we did. You're fortunate in that respect." "Fortunate is not how I describe my lot at present." Jaime's throat felt tight. He thought of Cersei upstairs, locked in a tower chamber. He thought of Tommen, a mere boy under Martell guardianship. And he thought of Tyrion, vanished into the city's depths or beyond. "What do you want from me?" "Information, for one." Nymeria turned to the steward. The man cleared his throat, eyes flicking between Jaime and a parchment on the table. "We're accounting for the crown's gold and valuables," he explained softly. "Tywin Lannister controlled the treasury before his end. He left behind a labyrinth of hidden ledgers. We suspect there are caches of coin or supplies stored throughout the castle. We know the late hand was no fool. Did he confide in you, Ser Jaime?" Jaime nearly laughed, though it came out as a bitter scoff. "My father? Confide in me? You mistake us. He never shared his plans, not even a morsel." Nymeria studied him with shrewd eyes. "Tywin was too cunning to trust easily, that much is certain. But do not assume he told you nothing in passing. A recollection of a name, a place, might be worth a fortune to us. If you help us track down hidden Lannister funds, The prince might be more inclined to leniency when your sister's trial begins. That last phrase made Jaime's heart hammer uncomfortably. Trial, he repeated. So it's to be official, is it? Yes, Nymeria said. Prince Doran believes the city must see that we do not stoop to secret murders. Your sister will face justice, her role in your father's crimes laid bare. Jaime glared at her, a mixture of anger and desperation. And you think rummaging for hidden gold is more important to me than Cersei's life? Perhaps I should be glad you aren't the one on the throne. Nymeria's expression did not waver. I'm not naive, Kingslayer. Your father's gold may not spare Cersei from condemnation. But every show of cooperation helps shape the outcome. If the prince sees you're willing to help the new regime, he might decide House Lannister has some place in the future of Westeros. If not, well, your sister's fate might be sealed more swiftly than you'd like. Jaime's jaw clenched. He still wore only a simple linen shirt and trousers, his status as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard stripped away since the Dornish took the city. The golden hand felt heavier than ever, an awkward reminder of his lost sword hand. Are you threatening me into betraying my father's secrets? He asked, voice low. We're offering you a chance to prove your loyalty to Tommen. Nymeria's tone was carefully measured. The boy is still king, albeit under Dornish guidance. If you want him to prosper or even to survive, cooperation goes a long way. No more illusions that the Lannisters rule unchallenged. That era died with Tywin. Jaime could taste bile in his throat, so it had come to this. He was trapped, powerless, forced to weigh Cersei's life and Tommen's rule against the pride of House Lannister. Did he truly even know where Tywin stashed secret coin? He recalled that his father once mentioned discreet shipments of gold from Casterly Rock, quietly placed in wagons bound for the capital. But Tywin never named the vault or the location. I can only guess, Jaime said, teeth gritted. Father kept me in the dark. Nymeria's scrutiny sharpened. Guess then. You're no simpleton. Speak. He stared at the steward, who had parchment and quill ready to jot down every word. Jaime inhaled, summoning what stray hints he might recall. My father used to talk about repurposing old storerooms in Maegor's Holdfast. He once had a conversation with Uncle Kevin about a locked vault beneath the dragon pit, but I never knew if that was rumor or truth. As for local houses that might hold coin for him, he favored House Hayford on the outskirts, if the rumors are correct. He always said the Hayfords were so deeply in debt to the Iron Throne that they'd do anything if he promised them gold. That's all I know. If it's worthless to you, so be it. Nymeria flicked her eyes to the steward, who hastily wrote it all down. Then she gave a single nod. We shall see what we can uncover. Let no one say you haven't been useful. Her voice carried no warmth. Jaime managed a thin smile, though it felt like a grimace. If this is your version of kindness, my lady, I'd hate to see your cruelty. Nymeria's face hardened. I've seen enough cruelty in my father's final moments, Jaime Lannister. Consider yourself fortunate that we're not returning the favor in kind. She motioned for the guards. Take him back to his quarters. As they marched Jaime away, his thoughts whirled. He had given them scraps, half-remembered references. Perhaps it would help him, perhaps not. He realized that if he truly wanted to protect Tommen, or even keep Cersei alive, he might have to play along more fully. The notion stung his pride. But pride was a thin shield against spears and trials. In the hush of the corridor, he steeled himself. A day would come to act. For now, he would wait, as he had waited in that cell, longing for the moment to free himself and his sister. 2 days later, as the city baked under a sweltering midday sun, Cersei Lannister stood at her window, staring out through the iron bars. The sky was a relentless blue, the rooftops shimmering with heat. She half expected to see dragons perched on the city walls, given how surreal her predicament felt. But there were no dragons, only the banners of Dorne where the lion once flew. The dawn she had feared for years had come to pass. House Lannister had fallen, and she was a prisoner in her own home. At first, she had demanded an audience with Prince Doran, screeching at the guards. Her fury only made them more rigid. They carried out their duty with polite emptiness, bringing trays of food thrice a day, water for washing, fresh linens. But not once did they allow her to leave the chamber without an escort. Her world was reduced to these four walls, a small adjoining privy, and a curtained bed of plush velvet that mocked her with its comfort. She felt caged like a songbird, albeit a songbird spitting curses. She turned as the chamber door opened. One of the guards, Dornish with a spear in hand, stepped aside for a visitor, Ellaria Sand. Cersei's lip curled at the sight of the woman. The paramour, the one who had thrust a dagger into Tywin's heart. Cersei's hatred flared. If not for Ellaria's meddling, perhaps they could have salvaged something in the wake of Oberyn's death. But Oberyn's paramour had fanned Dorne's rage, forging it into an army that now held the city in its claws. Ellaria wore a simple gown of pale gold, embroidered with swirling sunbursts along the hem. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing the subtle angles of her face. She stood near the threshold, arms at her sides. The guard closed the door behind her, leaving them alone. "Queen Regent," Ellaria greeted, voice carefully even. "I am still the Queen Mother," Cersei snarled. "You have no right to address me so casually." Ellaria's gaze flickered with old anger. "All your titles mean little now that your house is toppled. But if you prefer, I can call you Your Grace, or Your Grace in Chains." Cersei's cheeks burned, a mix of fury and humiliation. "If you've come to gloat, you'll find I'm not so easily tormented." "No," Ellaria said quietly. "I've come to speak. There will be a trial soon. Prince Dorne wishes it to be impartial, or at least appear so before the faith. You will be called to defend yourself." Cersei pressed a hand to the windowsill. "Defend myself? Against what crime, exactly?" "The murder of Elia Martell and her children, for one," Ellaria said calmly, though her voice trembled at the edges. "The conspiracy to hide that murder from justice. Your complicity in Tyrion's farce of a trial, which resulted in Oberyn's death. Your house's consistent betrayal of Dorne." Cersei's laugh was hollow. "Empty accusations. Or do you forget that it was the Mountain who killed Elia, that it was your precious Prince Oberyn who fell in a fair trial by combat? My father upheld the law." Ellaria's eyes flashed with something akin to pity. "I expected you to cling to that notion. But upholding the law hardly excuses slaughtering an innocent woman and her children, nor orchestrating a decades-long cover-up. And as for Oberyn's death, there was nothing fair about the arrangement Tywin forced. The Mountain was a tool of your father, and you know it." Cersei's nails bit into her palms. "All of this is worthless. The city is ours by right. Tommen is the king." "Tommen remains king," Ellaria allowed. "But he is surrounded by Dornish spears, Cersei. The boy is safe only because Prince Dorne chooses to keep him safe. If the prince wanted, Tommen would already be deposed or worse." A wave of protective rage swept through Cersei, though there was no outlet. She forced her voice to remain steady. "So that's the threat, is it? Behave, or you'll harm my son." Ellaria shook her head. "It's a truth, not a threat. If you truly care for Tommen, you'll face your trial with honesty instead of doubling down on your father's lies. Perhaps the faith might show you mercy, especially if the realm's new regents see that you hold your son's welfare above your false pride." Cersei wanted to hurl something. She wanted to claw this woman's eyes out. She wanted to see the city burn rather than yield. And yet she was powerless, a prisoner. Slowly, she forced her clenched jaw to relax. "You come in here, speaking of justice, but it is your dagger that killed my father. Do you deny that?" Ellaria's voice stayed surprisingly quiet. "I do not deny it. He was responsible for the murder of Elia Martell, for the covering up of that crime, for unleashing Gregor Clegane upon my beloved Oberyn. He boasted no remorse, so I exacted what the law would not give us. And now we offer you a lawful trial, something your father never offered Elia." Cersei's throat felt thick. She struggled to keep her composure, imagining the thousands of ways she would exact her revenge if she could. But each scenario ended with the same realization. House Lannister was broken, King's Landing was in Martell hands, and she was alone. Jaime was imprisoned somewhere, Tyrion gone. Kevin, her uncle, had left the city before the siege, likely at Casterly Rock. The woman who faced her now was under the protection of an entire Dornish army. There would be no easy vengeance. Go, Cersei spat. Leave me. I've heard all I care to. Ellaria inclined her head. Remember what I said. If you value Tommen, face the truth. Then she rapped on the door, and the guard let her out. Cersei was left with the hush of her chamber, the mocking heat of the midday sun, and the roiling hatred in her gut. A hush fell over King's Landing when news of Cersei's impending trial reached the alleys and squares. The date was set a fortnight hence, to be held in the Great September of Baelor under the watch of the new High Septon. Word spread that the Martells would present evidence of the crimes inflicted upon Elia Martell and her children, crimes that had gone unpunished for nearly 2 decades. Whispers buzzed at wine sinks and among septas alike. Was Cersei truly guilty? Was it not the Mountain alone who killed Elia? Some insisted that Tywin Lannister, being dead, had taken any guilt with him to the grave. Others pointed to decades of rumor that Cersei aided her father's schemes in the final days of Robert's rebellion, or that she'd used the secret of Elaya's murder to blackmail Oberyn into supporting Joffrey's wedding. Nobody knew the full truth, but they relished the drama. Even with foreign banners flying over the city, the small folk craved gossip. Prince Doran remained busy shaping the realm's politics. He visited the Great September, conferring with the High Septon, a timid man elevated after the last had died suspiciously. The rumor was that this new High Septon would do whatever the regent asked, but Doran tried to maintain a careful balance. He did not want to appear to bribe the faith. That could backfire. Instead, he stressed how important it was for the faith to serve justice impartially. How much coin might flow into the Sept's coffers once the city stabilized. Subtle promises, not overt bribes. Doran was a master at that kind of gentle persuasion. In the days before the trial, carpenters erected additional seating inside the Great September. A dais for the accused, flanked by 2 rows of spearmen wearing the sun and spear. Behind them, a cluster of gold cloaks who had submitted to the new regime. King Tommen would attend, with Margaery Tyrell at his side, as well as various courtiers. The Tyrell lords grumbled about witnessing the potential humiliation of the king's own mother, but they did not dare refuse. Dorne was the power now. On the morning of the trial, the city seemed to hold its breath. Dornish guards patrolled the streets in heavier numbers than usual, anticipating trouble. Rumors abounded that pockets of Lannister loyalists might try to break Cersei free. Some insisted that Jaime Lannister would stage a daring rescue. But the day remained strangely calm, as though the sheer weight of the Martell presence kept any revolt silent. When the bells of the Great September tolled, a crowd had gathered outside eager to witness something. Perhaps not the proceedings themselves, for only highborn or special guests were permitted inside, but the moment Cersei Lannister was hauled into the great doors. And hauled she was, though not in chains. Prince Doran, ever mindful of appearances, allowed her to walk with dignity. 2 Dornish spearmen at each side, and a cloak over her shoulders. Even so, the hush parted before her like a rift in the sea. Inside, the Sept's columns soared, white marble glinting in the colored light of stained glass windows. 7 towering altars circled the main floor. The king's seat, a carved wooden throne for Tommen, had been placed to one side, where he would watch. Tommen sat with Margaery, his face pale. The boy looked smaller than ever in the grandeur of the September nearby. Mace Tyrell fidgeted, uncertain whether his presence lent support or simply turned him into a spectator. On the other side stood Doran Martell, Areo Hoda at his back, and a retinue of Dornish lords. The sand snakes were arranged behind him. Obara with her spear tip resting against the floor, Nymeria with her arms folded, Tyene in a modest gown, her golden hair caught in a net. Ellaria stood near them, wearing a dark red dress that brushed the floor. She glanced at the dais in the center, where Cersei would soon stand. An ache twisted in her stomach, remembering Oberyn's last proud moments in a similar space, though he had fought in an open courtyard. Even so, this felt like a stage for life and death. Cersei approached, flanked by spears. She lifted her chin defiantly. The hush was broken only by the soft footfalls of the guards. She caught sight of Tommen, and for an instant, her face flickered with maternal sorrow. Then she squared her shoulders, the picture of haughty pride. The High Septon, robed in cloth of silver, stood at the foremost altar. He raised his hands, bidding the assembly for silence. "We come before the Seven today to judge the crimes alleged against Cersei of House Lannister, mother to King Tommen of House Baratheon." His voice trembled with the weight of the moment. "She stands accused of abetting and covering up the murder of Princess Elia Martell and her children, among other sins. Let the truth be spoken in the sight of gods and men." Cersei was guided to stand before him. She did not kneel, though the Sept's tradition called for kneeling before the Seven. A flicker of disapproval crossed the High Septon's face, but he pressed on. "Does the crown have a representative in this matter?" Prince Dorne cleared his throat. "I speak for the realm today, your High Holiness, as regent for King Tommen. This is no mere vendetta. It is a matter of justice for crimes that the Iron Throne once overlooked." Tommen shifted in his seat, as if wishing to object or speak, but Marjorie placed a hand on his arm. The boy king slumped back, his lips pressed tight. "Does the accused have counsel or witnesses in her defense?" the High Septon asked. Cersei stepped forward. "I shall speak for myself," she declared. Her voice rang through the Sept, strong and imperious. "I have nothing to hide." A tremor of tension flickered across the gathered watchers. No one believed that statement, but it was the posture she had chosen. "Very well," said the High Septon. "Let the charges be read." The great September acoustics made every word echo. A Septon with a scroll unrolled it, reciting the charges in a sonorous tone. That Cersei, as part of House Lannister's leadership, enabled Gregor Clegane to commit heinous acts during Robert's Rebellion, culminating in the brutal murder of Elia Martell and her children. That she conspired with her father to protect the Mountain from any and all inquiries into those crimes, stymieing justice for decades. That she bore false witness during the trial by combat of Tyrion Lannister, ensuring the Mountain was chosen as champion, a direct cause of Prince Oberyn Martell's death. Additional charges included the consistent manipulation of the realm's justice to shield Lannister interests, from the murder of King Joffrey to the intimidation of potential witnesses. When at last the charges ended, the High Septon turned to Cersei. "How do you answer these grave accusations?" Cersei's voice soared in the stillness. "They are lies and exaggerations. The late Tywin Lannister directed the realm's war efforts. My father acted in the best interest of House Lannister and, more importantly, of the realm, putting an end to the Targaryen tyranny. I did not murder Elia Martell, nor did I command or abet her death. Gregor Clegane's actions were his own. My father never confided in me any arrangement to harm Princess Elia. These so-called crimes are the twisted allegations of Dorne's thirst for vengeance. As for the trial by combat, it was Tyrion Lannister who demanded that spectacle, not me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cersei's tactic was expected. Lay the blame on Tywin, on Gregor, on anyone else. Illyria's hands tightened into fists at her sides. She knew better. Tywin had orchestrated it, yes, but Cersei's smirking compliance had been everywhere. She recalled how Cersei had exulted in Oberyn's downfall. But now, faced with a public reckoning, the Queen Mother claimed ignorance. Prince Dorne stepped forward. "We have witnesses to refute your claims, Lady Cersei." He motioned to the doors. A hush fell. Into the Sept stepped Ser Barristan Selmy, white-haired, once the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard under Aerys II Targaryen. He was rumored to have fled the capital after Joffrey dismissed him from service. In truth, he had vanished for a time, and there were whispers he might be in Essos, but apparently, Dorne had located him or convinced him to come. Gasps filled the pews. Cersei's eyes widened in shock. Ser Barristan bowed to the High Septon, then to Tommen. "Your Grace," he said to the boy king, voice grave, "I served your grandfather, King Aerys, as Kingsguard. I was in the Red Keep the day the capital fell to Lord Tywin's forces. I was also there in the aftermath when Princess Elia was slain." He turned a steady gaze upon Cersei. "I saw who was proud to announce the victory, who took credit for the conquest. The Lannisters came bearing gold cloaks to open the gates, and I recall how the princess's body was presented to the Queen Mother at the time. Your mother, Joanna Lannister, had already passed, but you, Cersei, were in the halls with your father that day." Cersei's voice cracked. "That's a lie. My mother died before the rebellion. I was a child." Barristan inclined his head. "Yes, you were young, but not so young that you understood nothing. You were near your father when he boasted that Gregor Clegane had proved a loyal retainer. Many men overheard. If you claim innocence now, I say you are lying." Cersei glared at him, her cheeks burning. "You old fool. You remember illusions. My father never boasted of killing children. He was no monster." Barristan's face hardened with the memory. "Lord Tywin rarely spoke in open court about such atrocities. But I heard him confide to certain lords that the bodies of Rhaenys and Aegon were proof that no Targaryen claimant would rise to threaten the new regime. He used them as tokens to pledge loyalty to King Robert. That you were present listening is known to some. I saw you in the corridors after. You were not so distraught as you claim now. Indeed, you seemed almost triumphant, proud of House Lannister's hand in ending the line of Elia Martell." A shocked murmur swept the September Barristan Selmy. Famed for his honesty and sense of honor, carried weight with the faith and the small folk. Cersei's hands trembled. "You dare claim I was complicit in murdering children? I was a girl of—" Dorne raised a hand. "We do not claim you gave the order, but that you gleefully supported your father's designs once you came of age. You shielded Gregor Clegane from justice for years, refusing any inquiry from Dorne. During King Robert's reign, you had ample time to bring the truth to light. Instead, you protected the mountain, and you set him loose again, culminating in my brother's death." Cersei's nostrils flared. "He was Robert's sworn knight, not mine." "Please," Dorne said. "Robert Baratheon hardly governed such matters. He left them to his hand, your father and thus you." Ser Barristan stepped aside, his testimony given. Another figure entered, Pycelle's old scribe, a gaunt man who stammered as he recounted records of letters from Dorne, letters that were never delivered to the king. They were intercepted by Lannister men and shelved. Then a minor retainer who claimed to have overheard Cersei mocking Oberyn in private, naming him the fool who still thinks to avenge his dead sister. Bit by bit, the scab was peeled back, revealing a long pattern of how House Lannister disregarded or suppressed any calls for accountability for Elia's murder. Cersei responded with denials, attempts to paint each witness as biased or incompetent. Now and then, she cast a desperate glance at Tommen, who seemed to wilt under the tension. Marjorie Tyrell kept a hand on the boy's wrist, whispering soothing words. The crowd watched with bated breath, enthralled by the spectacle of the once mighty Queen Mother on the defensive. At length, the High Septon turned to Cersei. "You have heard the testimonies, my lady. Do you have witnesses of your own?" Cersei drew herself up, regaining a shred of her old poise. "Summon Jaime Lannister, my brother. He can attest to the truth, that I played no part in these events." A hush followed. The High Septon looked to Prince Doran. "Ser Jaime stands imprisoned for other matters, though he has not been formally charged. Is the crown willing to produce him?" Doran paused, exchanging glances with Ilaria. She could guess his logic. Giving Jaime a chance to speak might be risky, but refusing would look like a denial of a fair trial. At length, the prince nodded. "We shall permit him to speak." A ripple of tension coursed through the assembly. Guards were sent for Jaime. While they waited, the High Septon allowed the crowd a brief respite. Soft murmuring broke out. Ilaria closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the day Oberyn had walked into a different chamber to champion Tyrion. That crowd had been hungry for blood, for spectacle. Now, the city was just as ravenous to see Lannisters brought low. When Jaime arrived, he was escorted by 4 Dornish spearmen. He wore a simple tunic, no cloak, no armor. The golden hand gleamed under the sept's candlelight. He looked around at the throng, finding Cersei's gaze. A flicker of sorrow passed between them, but also determination. He approached the dais, glancing uneasily at Dorne, at Barristan, at the silent watchers. Finally, he stood near Cersei, who swallowed her pride enough to move closer to him. "Jaime Lannister," the High Septon intoned, "you come at the accused request. You may speak in her defense if you choose." Jaime's breath was audible in the hush. "I am here to say that Cersei never gave any order to harm Princess Elia or her children. When Elia died, Cersei was only a girl of—" He stopped when he caught sight of Ser Barristan's stern gaze, and the memory of that day decades ago must have flickered through Jaime's mind. He had been the Kingslayer then, having just slain Aerys to save King's Landing from wildfire. He recalled standing in the throne room, waiting for the rebels to arrive. He remembered Tywin's men dragging corpses in Lannister colors. He remembered Cersei's expression. What had it been? "Speak," the High Septon prompted. Jaime forced himself to continue. "She was young. Tywin kept many secrets. If there was a plan to kill Elia, it was my father's, not hers. As for protecting Gregor Clegane in later years, she was the Queen Regent, yes, but King Robert was alive. The realm had a hand. Blame might not rest solely on her." He spoke haltingly, as though each phrase cost him. Obara glowered from behind Prince Doran, as if ready to fling her spear if his words went too far. Nymeria listened with narrowed eyes. "Are you saying she bears no guilt at all for shielding the mountain from justice?" Nymeria interjected, voice cutting. Jaime's jaw tightened. "The mountain was a sworn bannerman of our house. Gregor was valuable to the throne's stability. When the realm is threatened, a strong sword hand is sometimes tolerated. If that is guilt, then we are all guilty. For how many years did the realm accept violence for the sake of order?" His words echoed with a bleak truth. All of Westeros had turned a blind eye to some atrocity in the name of peace or power at one point or another. The crowd stirred. Cersei seized that moment, finding renewed courage. Precisely. If the Martells were so outraged, why did they wait all these years? My father was the hand of the king for long enough. Why not raise a complaint sooner? Because they knew the realm needed stability. And yet, now they used these old horrors to claim moral superiority. Illyria's blood began to simmer at Cersei's audacity. She wanted to spit that the Martells had tried, time and again, to gain justice. Every entreaty was rebuffed. But she held her silence, trusting Prince Doran to orchestrate a measured reply. He did. "We petitioned King Robert multiple times," Doran said, voice calm but laden with sorrow. "We demanded trials, we demanded an admission of guilt. We were ignored or placated with half measures. My brother came to King's Landing seeking the truth. He was killed by your champion in that farce you call a trial. Yes, we waited, because war had already torn the realm apart, and I would not hurl Dorne into another conflict lightly. But your father's cruelty forced our hand." Cersei pressed her lips into a thin line, but said no more. The High Septon raised a hand to quiet them. "I have heard enough for the day. This is a matter of the gravest weight. The faith must consider the testimonies and the realm's laws. On the morrow we shall render our judgment. Let the seven guide us." He banged his staff 3 times on the marble floor, and the session ended. Guards moved in to escort Cersei and Jaime out, leading them back to their respective confinements. The crowd buzzed, energy crackling in the grand columns of the September. Prince Doran huddled with Barristan, discussing details quietly, as Areo Hoda signaled the Dornish retinue to clear a path. Outside, people craned to see the outcome, but there was no immediate verdict. The city would have to wait another day. Illyria lingered, heart pounding. She could almost taste Oberyn's presence here, as if his spirit hovered to witness what they had wrought. Justice, but not quite the fierce, savage justice Oberyn might have claimed with his spear. This was more measured, more political. She reminded herself that it still meant progress. The realm now had to confront what was once hidden beneath Lannister might. As she turned to leave, she noticed Tyene standing quietly in a corner, eyes shining. Her sweet-faced expression belied the raging emotions within. "How do you think the judgment will go?" Tyene asked Ilaria in a low voice. Ilaria pressed her lips together. "We cannot know for certain. The faith may well convict her, or they might fear the precedent of condemning a queen mother. But Doran has prepared carefully. I trust him to ensure that the seven see the truth." Tyene nodded, though her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of a pew. "Father's memory demands it." Ilaria placed a hand over Tyene's, giving it a squeeze. Yes, Oberyn was never shy about naming the blame. Now the realm cannot ignore it. Outside, a swirl of dust and heat greeted them. The crowd parted as the Martell contingent made its way back toward the Red Keep. Vendors hawked wine and skewered meat, though few dared approach the group. The hush followed them through the city streets. Some gazed in awe, others turned away in fear or scorn. But in every alley and courtyard, the name Martell was on people's lips. They had taken the city, and now they were taking the Lion's legacy to trial. That evening, the Red Keep felt charged with tension. Prince Doran cloistered himself in his solar, speaking in low tones with Barristan Selmy and certain trusted advisors. Areo Hoda guarded the door. Behind those walls, they presumably weighed the final steps to ensure the next day's verdict would not slip through their fingers. Cersei was no fool. She might have some last trick or ally waiting to intervene. The city was a nest of hidden knives. Ilaria paced the corridor outside, restless. When the door opened, Doran emerged, leaning on his cane, with Barristan at his side. Ilaria gave the old knight a solemn nod. "Thank you, Ser Barristan, for your testimony." He looked weary. "I only spoke the truth of what I recall. It was never my desire to see a queen mother on trial, but justice has been denied for too long. If the realm is to heal, we cannot hide from what happened in Robert's rebellion." Doran clasped his shoulder. "Well said. I know you bear your own regrets over the Mad King's final days, but your honesty here will help set things right." Barristan bowed. "I shall remain in the city if you need my counsel, but I beg you not to use me as a piece in a greater game. My loyalty is to the realm, not to any petty vengeance." Doran inclined his head. "We seek no petty vengeance. Ser, rest assured of that." When the old knight left, Ilaria turned to Doran. "You've done all you can to ensure tomorrow's outcome?" His face, worn with age and gout, twisted slightly. "The faith is not wholly ours to command. The new High Septon is weak, easily swayed, but we must still let him appear to pass fair judgment. That said, the evidence is overwhelming. Cersei's guilt cannot be denied, unless the Septon chooses to be blind. And we have encouraged him not to be blind." Ilaria nodded. She knew that behind Doran's measured words lay the usual tokens of persuasion. Gold for the Sept's refurbishment, perhaps a promise to sponsor a new statue for Baelor's Walkway, or to re-establish certain faith privileges. It might be distasteful, but politics in Westeros was seldom clean. And if by some chance the High Septon claims she's innocent, a flicker of steel touched Doran's gaze. Then the city itself might riot. You've heard the talk in the streets. Some want to see the lion's hide flayed. Others want a spectacle. But I do not believe it will come to that. The High Septon has no wish to provoke Dorne's anger, nor to undermine the realm's first chance at a stable peace. He will find Cersei guilty. Ilaria exhaled. Then all that remains is her sentence. Doran sighed, gaze flicking to the window. Outside, the sun's last rays set the sky aflame. Yes, and that is where I must tread carefully. Will her punishment be execution, exile, a life in the Silent Sisters? If I demand her head, I risk turning Tommen and the Tyrells fully against us. Yet if I spare her with a token penalty, we look weak, our entire cause for justice undone. I must balance vengeance and mercy. She laid a gentle hand on his. I know this is not easy, but remember Oberyn's passion. He would want the guilty to pay. That was always the heart of his quest. You must do right by him, and by Elia's memory. The lines on Doran's face deepened. I will, though I suspect no sentence will truly wash away the grief we have carried. He squeezed her hand. I trust your judgment too, Ilaria. Let us see what the morrow brings. Morning arrived with a haze over the city, a damp fog rolling in from Blackwater Bay. Atop the city's hills, the great September of Baelor stood shrouded in a ghostly mist, its white marble domes faintly visible against the pale sky. The bells rang in a mournful peal, summoning all who cared to witness the final judgment of Cersei Lannister. Inside, the arrangement was similar to the day before, only this time the gallery was even more crowded. The rumor spread that the High Septon would proclaim a verdict. Highborn lords from across the Crownlands, a smattering of Tyrell bannermen, and influential septas filled the pews. At the front, Prince Dorne took his place with the Sand Snakes. King Tommen sat stiffly, Marjorie at his side, looking deeply anxious. Jaime Lannister, escorted by guards, stood near the dais. Cersei herself arrived last, shoulders squared, face pale but defiant. The High Septon conducted a brief invocation, calling on the Seven to guide him. Then he turned to Cersei, voice tremulous as it echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Lady Cersei of House Lannister, you stand accused of complicity in the murder of Elia Martell, Rhaenys Targaryen, and Aegon Targaryen, as well as obstructing justice for those crimes, culminating in the death of Prince Oberyn Martell. Yesterday we heard the evidence. Today we deliver the faith's judgment in the sight of the gods. A hush fell, broken only by the faint rustle of cloth. Even Cersei seemed breathless. At the periphery, Oberyn Sand held her spear in a tight grip, ready to thrust it skyward if the verdict called for Cersei's head. Ilaria felt her pulse flutter. Dorne sat unmoving, his cane leaning against the pew. The High Septon closed his eyes as if in prayer. Then he spoke. We find that you did, through your silence and your father's power, abet the grievous wrong committed against House Martell. We find that you took no steps to bring Gregor Clegane to justice. We find that you profited from the concealment of these crimes and perpetuated them by ensuring no retribution came for Elia Martell's murder. By the laws of gods and men, these actions render you complicit. The guilt is yours. An audible ripple of shock spread among those gathered. Cersei's face drained of color. Tommen let out a choked sound, his small hands clutching the arms of his seat. Marjorie's eyes flared with alarm. All around, people leaned forward, hungry for the sentencing. The hush returned. The High Septon drew in a deep breath. In the name of the Seven, the faith condemns you for these crimes. Should the crown see fit to pass a sentence of death, the faith shall not oppose it. Yet we also acknowledge that you were not the primary architect of these evils, nor the one who wielded the blade. If you seek the Mother's mercy, you might find a lesser punishment. We leave the final judgment to Prince Dorne Martell, regent for King Tommen, so that the realm may be satisfied. May the Seven guide his decision. All eyes shifted to Dorne Martell. Even the High Septon took a step back, leaving the resolution in his hands. Cersei looked at Dorne, her lips trembling. Tommen seemed near tears, yearning to rush to his mother's side, but Marjorie kept him still. Jaime's jaw was set, golden hand clenched at his side. The tension in the sept was suffocating. Dorne rose slowly, leaning on his cane. He looked upon Cersei with profound sorrow, then spoke in a measured tone. I stand as regent for the realm, a position granted by the might of Dorne's victory, yet also by the necessity of a stable throne. I do not forget the crimes that took my sister's life, nor the vengeance that led my brother to challenge Gregor Clegane. You, Cersei Lannister, could have told the truth long ago. You could have brought the mountain to justice, spared us all this bloodshed. But you chose to hide behind your father's name. That choice led to Prince Oberyn's death. He paused, scanning the onlookers. Our cause was to secure justice. We have done so by exposing the truth and by ending Tywin Lannister's tyranny. The question remains, how do we punish you? A faint rustle of movement. Oberyn glared, clearly hoping for a swift condemnation. Tywin's lips parted in anticipation. Ilaria felt her chest tighten. Death is an easy sentence, Dorne said, voice heavy. It ends a life in a moment, satisfies a thirst for revenge, but does not heal the realm. nor does it bring back Elia or Oberyn. Yet letting you walk free would be an insult to the memory of those we lost, and an affront to the justice we promised." Cersei's eyes were wide, her knuckles white on the dais. Tommen dared to speak, voice quivering. "Uncle, Prince Dorne, if you spare her, I—" "Hush, child," Marjorie whispered, drawing him back. Dorne continued, unwavering. "I sentence you, Cersei of House Lannister, to a term of penance in the custody of the faith. You shall be confined to the Red Keep's sept, to live under the guardianship of the Silent Sisters, devoting your days to prayer and reflection. You shall hold no position of influence at court, nor any right to counsel the king. Should you attempt to flee or subvert this penance, the sentence of death will be imposed immediately. Let the realm see that we do not kill for pleasure, but nor do we show mercy to the point of forgetting our dead." Collective gasp arose. Ellaria could sense the swirl of reactions. Some in the crowd felt cheated, wanting Cersei's head on a spike. Others were relieved there would be no further blood spilled. Tommen looked close to sobbing, half in relief that his mother lived, half in dread of what that penance meant. Jaime's shoulders slumped, unsure whether to be grateful or furious. And Cersei, shock warred with rage on her face. She was to be cloistered in silence, cut off from power, her will broken. Better than death, perhaps, but humiliating beyond measure. She stared at Dorne as though he had stabbed her. Dorne inclined his head to the High Septon. "Henceforth, she is in your care, to remain at the Red Keep's sept for the duration of her life, save for any further command by the crown. The faith shall keep watch." The High Septon bowed, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "So be it," he pronounced. "May the Seven have mercy on your soul, Cersei Lannister." A soft uproar flickered through the pews. Some Dornish lords muttered that she had gotten off too lightly. Obara's hand tightened on her spear. Dorne turned to face her, as if expecting protest. But Obara only spat on the floor, no small show of her disgust, before she marched out. Nymeria and Tyene exchanged glances, then moved to follow. It was done. Cersei would live, but as a powerless prisoner, draped in vows of penance she did not believe in. A living trophy of Dorne's triumph, a reminder that the Martells could show mercy where the Lannisters had not. Amid the swirling tension, Tommen began to cry. Marjorie held him close, murmuring reassurance. Jaime approached Cersei, who shook with fury. Her face was ghostly pale, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She whipped around to glare at Dorne as if to scream, but words failed her. The Faith's Septas stepped forward, laying gentle hands on her arms. "Come, my lady, we shall lead you to your new quarters." Cersei jolted away from them, but there was nowhere to run. The Septas guided her, step by step. Out of the Great September Jaime lingered, torn between following or confronting Dorne. But finally he turned and trailed after his sister. Ellaria exhaled, the weight in her chest shifting. It was not the savage vengeance some might have craved. Yet it was justice, perhaps, in a form that might serve the realm's future. She caught Dorne's eye. He looked exhausted, as though years had been added to his age in mere moments. But he stood firm, only leaning more heavily on his cane. Ellaria saw in his expression a blend of resolve and sorrow. The cycle was complete. Tywin was dead, Cersei stripped of power, Oberyn avenged. Yet the cost was immeasurable. So many years lost, so much grief. As the sept emptied, the small folk outside clamored to know the verdict. Soldiers barked orders for them to disperse, but rumors spread quickly that Cersei would spend the rest of her days as a penitent in the city she had once ruled. Some sneered that she got off lightly, others declared it poetic, imprisoned in the same Red Keep she once thought impregnable. As dusk settled, Ellaria walked with Dorne and the Sand Snakes back to the keep. The city's streets were alive with murmurs, braziers lighting corners, shadows flickering on walls. Men and women peered from windows, half fearful, half curious. The Martell sigils fluttered overhead in the night breeze. When they reached the Red Keep's courtyard, Dorne dismissed the rest of his entourage, turning to Ellaria. "You look troubled." She let out a long breath. "It is what needed to be done," she said. "I only wonder if Oberyn would have been satisfied, or if he would have demanded her head." "Oberyn might have demanded more," Dorne admitted, a pang of affection crossing his face at the memory of his fiery brother. "But I have the weight of the realm upon me. Perhaps I have chosen a kinder path than he would. Yet I hope in his heart he would understand. We gained the truth. The realm will not soon forget what House Lannister did, and we avoided turning Cersei into a martyr." Ellaria gazed up at the fortress's looming towers. A memory of Oberyn's grin wavered before her, so vivid she nearly heard his laugh. "Yes," she whispered. "You are right. Perhaps this is better." Dorne patted her hand. "Your ship to Braavos leaves in 2 days. If you still wish to go, that is." She hesitated, then nodded. "I will go. Perhaps seeing the world beyond this city will help me find peace. If I can secure the Iron Bank's goodwill for the crown, it will mean fewer battles for our people. And fewer battles might mean fewer mothers weeping over lost loves." Dorne's eyes were kind. "Safe travels, Ellaria. You have earned your rest, and the realm still needs your strength." She inclined her head. Together, they passed through the keep's gate, leaving behind the hush of the street. Tomorrow, the city would resume its routine, with Cersei locked away in penitent garb, Jaime fuming at his inability to free her, Tommen a child king overshadowed by Dorne. But for now, with justice done in the Sept, there was a sense that a profound chapter in the realm's history had closed. The sun had indeed risen on King's Landing, revealing the ashes of House Lannister's once great power, and in those ashes, House Martell stood ascendant. That night, Ellaria found herself unable to sleep. She walked the corridors of the Red Keep, recalling the day Oberyn had strolled here, his laughter echoing, his eyes dancing with mischief. Ghosts of the past haunted every corner. For a moment, she paused at the training yard, deserted now in the moonlight, remembering how Oberyn's spear whirled in practice. She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush her skin. Cough nearby startled her. Tyene emerged from the shadows, wearing a long cloak over her shift. "Ellaria," she murmured. "I thought I was the only restless one tonight." Ellaria managed a small smile. Cersei's verdict rattled everyone. Tyene nodded. "We spoke of vengeance for so long, and now that it's done, I feel empty. Father is still gone. The mountain is rotting somewhere in these dungeons, neither alive nor dead. Cersei is disgraced but breathing. Part of me wants to scream that it's not enough, but maybe that scream would only echo back." Ellaria slipped an arm around Tyene's shoulders. "You and your sisters have a life ahead of you. Oberyn wanted you to live, not to be consumed by hatred." She thought of how fiercely Oberyn loved all his daughters, each unique in temperament. "You bear the Martell name proudly. That alone honors him." Tyene leaned against Ellaria. "I worry that we've only lit a spark. The Tyrells might chafe under our rule. The Iron Bank might fund new enemies. The realm could be plunged into war again at any time. Dorne might stand tall, but for how long?" Ellaria gazed at the moonlit sky. "Until we learn how to wield power without turning it into oppression. That's Prince Doran's aim. We don't want to become the very thing we hated. If we can rule justly, maybe we avoid another war. Or at least we stall it until our children inherit a calmer land." Tyene nodded, though her eyes were still troubled. "I suppose that is the dream Father always spoke of, a realm that cannot so easily excuse murder." They fell silent, side by side, in the lonely training yard. Overhead, the moon glowed like a pearl, silvering the stone floor. In that hush, Ellaria allowed a fleeting sense of peace. Perhaps Oberyn's spirit was here, watching, content that House Martell had triumphed, that the city that devoured him now bowed to Dorne's banner. There was sorrow in the victory, but also a glimmer of hope for a fairer tomorrow. 2 mornings later, Dawn saw Ellaria at the docks on the Blackwater Rush, a small trunk of her belongings at her feet. Prince Doran had arranged a sleek Dornish galley to bear her to Braavos, faster than most Westerosi ships, with a seasoned captain loyal to Sunspear. The city was stirring to life, fishermen casting nets into the water, porters loading casks of wine or salted fish. A few passers-by recognized Ilaria and kept their distance, awed or afraid. Oberyn, Nymeria, and Tyene stood with her, wearing hooded cloaks. None of them cared for extended farewells in public, but they wanted to see her off. Each gave her a brief embrace. Oberyn's eyes gleamed with reluctant admiration. "You were no warrior with a spear, but you struck the biggest blow of us all. Don't forget that." "I won't," Ilaria said softly. Nymeria took her hand. "Speak sweetly to the bankers, but keep an eye on the assassins in Bravos. That city can be as treacherous as King's Landing." Tyene pressed a small vial into Ilaria's palm. "A mild poison," she whispered. "Should you need a final defense, best slip it into someone's wine rather than wield a blade you're unfamiliar with." Ilaria felt a surge of affection for them, each so different, yet bound by the same unwavering loyalty to their father's memory. "Thank you," she said, tucking the vial in her cloak. "I'll return as soon as the negotiations are done. Prince Dorne wants to pay the Iron Bank just enough to keep them at bay. If I succeed, we may avoid them funding a rival claimant. If I fail," she shrugged, "we'll face that day when it comes." They nodded. The gangplank was lowered, and the captain signaled Ilaria to board. Before she stepped onto the plank, she felt Tyene touch her shoulder. "Ilaria," she said, her voice subdued in the morning chill. "Father would be proud of you, of us. Never doubt that." Ilaria closed her eyes briefly against the prickle of tears. "I hope so. I carry him in my heart." With that, she made her way onto the deck. The crew raised the sails, the crisp breeze off the bay catching the canvas. Ilaria watched as the sand snakes retreated to the pier, blending with the swirl of dockworkers. The city's skyline spread before her, crowned by the Red Keep. The Martell banners still flew from its turrets, bright as flames in the dawn light. She wondered how the realm would change in the months and years to come. Dorne had conquered the capital in righteous fury. Now it must learn to rule with a steadier hand. As the galley moved downstream, leaving behind the rising sun over King's Landing, Ilaria leaned against the ship's railing. She pictured Oberyn's smile. In a sense, their story had ended the day he fell beneath the mountain's fist. Yet in another sense, it continued through the people who loved him, through the justice finally dealt to those who had stolen Elia's life. She could almost feel the weight of his arm draped around her shoulders, hear the echo of his voice. "We fight for the living, not merely the dead." The sails filled, propelling them across the water. Behind her, the city receded, the new seat of Martell power. Ahead lay open sea, Bravos, and the next test of diplomacy. Ilaria took a final breath of the salty air, letting the wind whip her hair around her face. Justice had been served, imperfect, incomplete, but real. Now she would do her part to keep that victory from slipping into chaos. The future of Westeros, of Dorne, of the fragile boy King Tommen, all teetered on the edge of shifting alliances. But for this moment, at least, Ilaria felt a calm determination. She had avenged Oberyn, toppled the Lannisters, and set a new dawn in motion. Whatever came next, she would face it with the spirit of the Red Viper guiding her steps. Far behind, at the highest pinnacle of the Red Keep, a single banner stirred in the breeze, the golden spear piercing a blazing sun. House Martell ascendant at last. If the realm had feared the Viper's bite, now it felt the slow, coiling embrace of Dorne's rule. Change had come to King's Landing, and with it, the hope that the next generation might finally live free of the old ghosts that had haunted these halls. A fragile hope, but one worth defending. Ilaria closed her eyes, whispered a silent farewell to the city. Then the ship's prow cut through the waters, bearing her onward into the unknown, and the sun rose higher, warming her face in a promise of new beginnings.